Chapter 27, Culmination 3. Chapter 11, Culmination 3. 1997, 1998. Percy is 21 and 34. Severus is 36. Harry is 17. And Dumbledore no longer lives. November 1997. For all that Percy's life has changed indelibly over the last year. For all that he has a mark on his arm, and he's controlling the Minister of Magic, and the freedom of travel has been revoked, and he reports to the most evil wizard of their time. For all that he has, by many accounts, failed miserably at his arrogant, initial task, and is now playing at damage control. By the time that November slithers around the corner, Percy has become somewhat reconciled to cadence of his days. Harry is, well, not safe, but ensconced in the Black family manor with Percy's brother, the smartest witch of her age, and Harry's godfather, heir to the Black name. Ginny is at school, and Severus wouldn't let anything happen to her. Bill is protected by a Fidelius charm with Auntie Muriel. Charlie's out of the country, and the twins are in hiding and hopefully will stay put. Landon is in France, and Sonali in India. So while Percy is not relaxed, certainly it is impossible for him to ignore the harsh realities of their situation, given that he must go to Malfoy Manor weekly, and every Thursday afternoon he must examine the mudbloods that have been captured and decide whether to interrogate them or send them straight to the ministry. He at least feels he has something like a handle on the situation. Certainly being able to speak to Tonks, even infrequently, has assuaged some of the guilt in Percy's heart. But he's worried about Tom. Tom disappears from his portrait for long stretches at a time, and Percy does not want him to speak to the Dark Lord more than is necessary. As long as Tom resents the Dark Lord but is hesitant to incite his anger, Percy can sleep restfully, or as restfully as he can, given everything else that worries him. But even Tom begins to feel distant, removed, as the days pass and Percy becomes entrenched in his routine and the ordered chaos of the ministry. In truth, Percy has on more than one account entirely forgotten about Tom, sitting in his portrait, flat and unaging and unalterable. Sometimes Percy forgets about the other Tom too, even though he can now identify the strange wisps of emotion that float into Percy's mind as the Horcrux reacting to whatever he sees through Harry's eyes. This is how you exist in war, Percy thinks to himself sometimes. He's learned how to cut the line at the cafeteria by raising a single, imperious eyebrow, or better yet, send Julian, the new Percy, or Matthew, the new Mathilda, to fetch him lunch. He's learned to shield himself nearly continuously, to keep his mental guards up at all times, to smooth his face into a cool, emotionless facade. He's learned which ministry checkpoints are the least crowded, and which guards are frightened enough of him to wave him through after only a perfunctory glimpse at his arm, and which employees are hiding their undesirable pasts, and which snatchers can be paid off to deliver their bounty to Yaxley's office directly, where the other man skims some of the reward money for himself, and then tosses the captives into the cells without identifying them until Percy's weekly rounds. And they've all learned, the assistants and the department heads, struggling to acclimate to their new jobs. The guards posted at every entrance and exit, the people who now have jobs that never existed before, like feeding prisoners en masse, or disposing of their dangerous personal affects, like creating propaganda posters that strike just the right balance of fear-mongering but reassuring, the housewives that learn the patrol schedule in Diagon Alley so that they may do their shopping unobserved, the shopkeepers that know when to report a suspicious character and when to turn a blind eye, the delivery people that sort through the chaotic issues of supply and demand, ignored completely by those in power and manage, to keep food on the shelves and robes in stock and ingredients under preservation charms. They've all learned, and so the days pass, and the Dark Lord needs to do very little to maintain his grasp on society. Of course, just when Percy has this idiotic thought that he can learn to live with this, and hopefully will have enough stability that he can return to the task of figuring out how to contact Harry and have him destroy the locket, Tom intervenes. "The Dark Lord is pleased with you," Tom reports back to Percy, lounging in his portrait like someone may sink into an armchair after a hard day's work. Percy pauses in the middle of siphoning blood out of his clothes, an extremely delicate maneuver if one wants to preserve the structural integrity of the silk, and gives him a look. Why do you say that? Well, he's been impressed with your brewing, though significantly less pleased with your lack of progress regarding finding him the prophecy. In fact, it has occurred to him that you may be trying to spy on him for your family, Tom says with an ironic laugh. But I convinced him you were properly loyal to the cause and more capable than many of those idiots, despite your inability to properly torture someone. And how did you do that? Percy asks tiredly. Tom grins up at him, and the flash of his teeth suddenly reminds Percy of his Tom, of the 16-year-old boy Tom had once been, and he swallows roughly against a sudden urge to cry. Last time that Percy spoke to Tom in his mind, Tom had looked agitated as the winds of Hogwarts whipped through his dark hair, but he had looked suspiciously at Percy and refused to reveal what had him so worried. Oughtn't you ask why? Percy raises an eyebrow, irritated all over again at both Toms for their turbulent, mercurial emotions that rule Percy's ever-waking second. Tom frowns petulantly, as if Percy had robbed him of a pleasure, but then says, "Because we are partners, of course." I wasn't aware Dark Lords had partners. Well, luckily for you, I shan't be a Dark Lord, Tom snaps, and his voice is suddenly cool. Percy flinches from reflex and Tom continues, tone marginally warmer. His mistake was believing he could rule from fear and fear alone. And what will you rule from then? Power, says Tom with studied casualness. Knowledge. They will fear me, but they will fear my might, and respect my abilities, and long for my acclaim. Nothing will escape my notice. Percy ducks his head and returns to his robes. We need to get the snake, Tom says, curling his tongue around the word we. Percy looks up again at this. Tom never says her name, never says Nagini, always the snake, and always in the same contemptuous tone. I thought you could not get to the snake, Percy points out, acerbically. Percy is doing all that he can. He does not need yet another master overseeing his work and deeming it inadequate. Tom gives him a lazy smile. Your father's life force only does so much. I fear it may be time to release him. Percy does not say anything, but his entire body tenses, and he cannot control the anger that crosses over his face like a shadow. Tom's laugh, bright and airy, is a jarring contrast to Percy's mood. Relax, Percy. I will not kill him, though his continued existence does make you regrettably weak. Nevertheless, I imagine you ought to take the day off tomorrow. I can't be certain that your father will take his release safely. Percy licks suddenly dry lips. On one hand, he's not blind to what Tom is doing, distract Percy with Arthur's life, so that Percy cannot interfere in his experiment with Nagini. On the other hand, Percy cannot so coolly walk away from his father, not really, and Tom bloody well knows it. Tom raises an eyebrow at him. Percy cannot stop Tom from experimenting on Nagini. Tom spends half of his time in Parkinson Manor, usually as Bulstrode, and the other half of his time as the bloody minister of magic. No, if Tom wants to get at Nagini, there is nothing Percy can do save destroy the portrait then and there. And of course, the only reason that Percy still has to avoid destroying the portrait is Tom's hold on Arthur. Tom must know that. Tom could only be willing to release his hold on Arthur if he is confident enough in whatever power Nagini will provide him to assume a challenge from Percy would later be impossible. But they have the portrait, do they not? As long as Percy has the original portrait, he has some hold over Tom. He'll have to make sure that Tom does not remember to take the portrait with him. It will be essential in the coming months that Tom has no reason to doubt Percy. So instead of saying any of the dozens of other things that Percy is thinking, he merely leans forward and looks intently at Tom. Be careful, Percy breathes, widening his eyes, and allowing all of the affection that he has for Tom, despite himself, color his tone. The snake is a Horcrux too, and while you are undoubtedly the stronger Horcrux, we do not know what protections he used on the snake. Do not be hasty, Tom. I could not bear it if you left me, this close to the end. Percy is not even lying. With practiced ease, he does not bother to think too closely about why that last sentence was true. To his surprise, Tom regards him with a silent look, too inscrutable on his painted face for Percy to make out, but clearly meaningful nevertheless. I will be careful, Tom promises. He hesitates and then says, Your father will suffer tomorrow, but he should not die if you are very careful. Percy swallows and nods tightly. Tom is going after Nagini tomorrow. He's going to release my father. Tomorrow. Yes. I believe your parents are back at the burrow. Minerva helped them to ward it with William. I am frightened, Severus. Percy does not even feel embarrassed at admitting it. He hesitates, wandlessly evaporating the drips of ink that threaten to mar the notebook. I fear this will make Tom too strong. I fear we will not be sure whether the Horcrux is fully extracted from the snake, Severus writes back. Percy cannot even afford to be shocked that Severus admitted to being nervous. Rather, the thought fills him with dread. I spoke to a Dementor. You spoke to it. It has been helping us. The diary is still active. Harry has it. I believe Sirius has the locket still. Severus does not respond for several seconds. Severus' reply, when it comes, is darkly written, as if the man is pressing firmly into his own notebook with his quill. We have to move with intention. Do you know where Potter is? Percy thinks of Tom. One of them, presumably at headquarters. But if he leaves, I believe I can find him. For all of McGonagall's and Bill's protections, Percy does not find it particularly difficult to break past the wards on the burrow. Perhaps because they recognize his blood. Percy does not know whether he should be annoyed at them for allowing Weasleys to enter the threshold, an obvious security flaw, or pleased that neither of them truly believe him to be evil. Regardless, his mother has him at one point within minutes of his entering through the back door into the kitchen. Percy raises his hands instinctively, his wand flat against his palm and tucked behind his thumb, as his mother whirls on him in a fury. The door bangs loudly behind him. Percy, Molly says evenly, flicking a glance to the old family clock. Percy looks at it, too. His spoon turns slowly over to home before springing back to mortal danger, joining the rest of the family. Not a very useful clock, that. Percy wonders, not for the first time, how it's meant to even work. His father had enchanted it before Percy had been born. Mother, says Percy. He casts his mind around for something to say to verify his identity and cannot think of anything about himself that his mother might know. She raises her eyebrows. Well, you should check it's me, Percy protests. What if I were a Death Eater? His mother asks pointedly, not even bothering to look meaningfully at his left arm, where the mark throbs painfully. Percy has almost gotten used to how it feels, though he avoids looking at his arm whenever possible. I'd say we're past that, Percy. You are my son. I know what your magic feels like. I helped create it with my own body. Mother, please, Percy says, his arms beginning to ache from holding them up. I need to see father. A shadow passes behind his mother's eyes, but she does not change her stance. A bit late to come and pay your respects, isn't it? Mother, please, says Percy again, this time in irritation. He can't help it. He has to drop his arms, though he is careful not to hold his wand in a way that may appear threatening. We've not much time. No, she agrees with him coldly. We don't have much time, and I don't think we ought to be spending it with you. These words hit Percy as tangibly as a stinging charm, and he takes a step back, feeling the wooden door behind his back. For all that Ron looks at him with suspicion, Bill with pity, Ginny with mistrust, and the rest of them with cool hatred, he is unprepared to deal with his mother's outright dismissive anger. He'd rather she were screaming at him and cursing him. For his entire childhood, he'd thought of his mother as a source of noise. Loud laughter, loud yelling, loud crying. This woman with thin cheeks and graying red hair pulled back into a tight bun is a mystery to him. Percy suddenly thinks of Bellatrix Lestrange. Percy swallows and then raises his chin, meeting his mother in the eyes. Marley may have killed Bellatrix in one lifetime, but Percy killed her in another. I need to monitor father. I have reason to believe his symptoms are going to worsen today. And why would that be? Someone is going to try and kill the Dark Lord's snake today, Percy says carefully. Father's magic has been affected by it for the last 2 years. That connection is what's been killing him. Not entirely a lie, of course. Percy has thought often about the fact that his father was injected with venom from a Horcrux. He'd study it, if he could, but this is the best he can do given his current constraints. This throws Marley visibly, though her wand arm does not flinch. Percy can tell by the way she blinks in surprise and flares her nostrils just slightly that she had not been expecting to hear him say that. Who? Marley says finally. What? Who's going after the snake? Percy thinks to himself that it is a shame that Marley and Andromeda do not get along. They both have the tendency to cut straight to the heart of the matter. I can't say. Marley exhales noisily and then crosses her arms. Then I have no reason to believe you. Percy clenches his jaw. I can't say, Mother. I really can't. You don't know who he is, and to explain would be to put you in terrible danger. Suffice to say that I have reason to believe, no, that I know that the snake is going to die today. I may be wrong about it affecting Father, but I'd rather not take that risk, would you? Forgive me if I don't immediately let you in, Marley counters immediately. I was not aware that you still factored your father and I into your considerations. No, because of me, dozens of Muggle-borns have escaped the country, Percy snaps back, though he knows it is a foolish thing to say, and that he may have to obliviate his mother before he leaves. I'm sorry if it offends your moral compass that I position myself to be useful. Merlin knows Dumbledore was uninterested in any insights I may have, but others are able to take action on those insights. Mother, I am putting myself in danger every day. I came here as a courtesy because I care for Father. I will not stand here and be insulted like this. His mother pauses and gives him an evaluative look. Percy should not be insulted that his own mother doubts that he may be a spy, that she was so ready to believe him a genuine Death Eater. But he is. I'm your son, says Percy bitterly. The son most similar to you, even we both wish at times I was not. Maybe you ought to think about what you would have done in my robes. He is readying himself to overpower her if necessary when she gives him a brisk nod. Your father is upstairs, Marley says abruptly, uncrossing her arms and walking in front of him with quick, even strides. Percy follows her, trying to calm his anger and focus on the task at hand. The sight of his father, however, stops him 2 steps into the room. Small and delicately swaddled in the great bed that Percy still remembers from his and Arthur's mental battle with Tom, his father looks more like a young child than an aging wizard. Before he can stop himself, Percy turns agonized eyes on his mother, who meets his gaze solidly. Yes, Marley says, in answer to the question that Percy cannot bring himself to ask. Percy swallows and nods, wiping his suddenly sweaty hands on his robes. He'd worn nice robes to this meeting, stupidly, the dark grey robes that Lucius had silently purchased for him months ago. Percy had perhaps thought his mother would notice how they fell softly around his shoulders, enhancing his height while disguising some of the weediness of his slight frame. Here, in this stifling warm room, his mother only has eyes for Arthur. Percy moves slowly, not wanting to wake his father, and perches on the edge of the bed. The sturdiness of the frame steadies him. Unbidden, a memory from his first childhood floats into his mind. He'd been 10, nearly 11, and though he'd been longing to leave Burrow for months, the type of terror that can strike at will had crept into his mind at supper. The room had been so small, so cramped, so loud, but the idea of silence had seemed suddenly far more terrifying than the familiar discomfort of home. His father had noticed, and after dinner he'd called him into the room. He'd sat just like this, though his feet could not quite touch the thick rug underneath, and admitted in a small voice that he was afraid to go to Hogwarts. Percy cannot remember exactly what Arthur had said, but even decades later, he remembers the warmth of assurance that his father's words had laid over his shoulders. In this timeline, of course, no such interaction had occurred. In fact, Percy does not think he'd asked either of his parents for any advice since awakening as an adult in a child's body. For the first time, Percy realizes what he'd stolen from his parents. No wonder his mother looks at him with such suspicion. No wonder he does not feel at home here. He'd stopped thinking of his parents as his parents years ago and robbed them of years of parenting him. And as a consequence, all of those little intimate moments had disappeared, as if he'd blown out a candle and wished them away. The loss of it washes over him in a wave, and he feels sorrow both for himself and for his parents, for all that could have been. He is a stranger to his parents, even if they are not strangers to him. Perhaps if Percy were ever given a third life, he'd try to be a good son, or at least something closer to it. Then his father moans, a short, aborted sound, something between a gasp and a groan and a cry of pain, his thin lips opening helplessly, and Percy's attention snaps immediately to the present. Arthur's eyes are still closed, but his hand reaches out in front of him, knobbly fingers splayed, as if to ward off an invisible enemy. Arthur, Marley cries out, and hurries around Percy to clasp Arthur's hand tenderly. His fingers scrabble against Marley's hand, and then close around her own fingers, and Percy has to look away and swallow. He leaves his mother to comfort his father, and instead incants a low, murmuring diagnostic charm, one that Tom had taught him a few weeks ago. He realizes now why Tom had taken the time to teach it to him. The charm is very informative but incredibly exhausting, and Percy has to maintain a low-level awareness of his own magic throughout the entire thing. Any notions Percy may have harbored of leaving Arthur here under an alarm ward or something similar would be entirely forestalled by the constant effort it takes to maintain the diagnostic charm. I'm not coming after you, you fool. Percy thinks uncharitably toward whatever version of Tom may live in his head. Kill the bloody snake and make my life easier. Tom doesn't respond, either of them. Percy turns his attention back to Arthur, who is shaking softly in the bed, his eyes still screwed shut. Even in his emancipating state, his eyebrows are thick and bushy, and Percy resolutely passes his eyes over the familiar way Arthur's left eyebrow tufts. He does not have time for sentimentality. He has to focus. The charm informs Percy that Arthur's magic is pulsing and receding in an irregular rhythm that seems, oddly, to resemble a heartbeat, though it does not exactly match Arthur's own. Every time Arthur's magic swells, Arthur gasps again, as if his breath is trapped in his throat, and then gives a relieved exhale when the flow of magic temporarily subsides. What is happening to him? Marley demands, her voice rising as Arthur coughs his way around another swell. Percy does not respond, noticing with narrowed eyes how Arthur's magic is beating faster, as if the heart is excited, as if it were exultant. It's his heartbeat, Percy whispers to himself, amazed despite himself. He has no proof that it is Tom's heart beating its way through Arthur's magic, but Percy has no trouble imagining the way Tom's heart would quicken at the sight of the snake guarding a part of his soul. Whose? Percy bites his lip. I cannot say, he evades, casting the next incantation in the charm with a low, gusting murmur. Percival Weasley, you tell me right now, Marley demands, but Percy waves her aside, focusing. The rhythm of the pulses has quickened, and the thump-thump-thump of Arthur's magic, coupled with his hoarse breathing, has Percy enthralled. You can picture it now. Tom, advancing on the snake, his wand drawn. The snake, coiling and hissing, the two parts of Voldemort's soul speaking to each other in a blend of Parseltongue and words unsaid. Arthur cries out brokenly, and Percy clasps his other hand before he can think about even moving. Tom must have just struck, maybe immobilized the snake, or begun the long incantation that he'd been practicing to extract souls out of mice and rats and kittens in the Minister of Magic's darkened office. Percy had seen him do it. Percy had seen him kill a mouse and then revive it with the soul of another mouse. Percy had seen the mouse walk away as if the same, and he had swallowed around a rise of disgust and ought to smile admiringly at Tom. Percy had seen him do the impossible, and he has absolutely no trouble imagining Tom doing it again. Mine, Arthur bites out, his eyes flying open, flashing red as he snarls out the word. Not yours, Molly says right back, squeezing Arthur's fingers even tighter. Let him go, Tom, begs Percy as he continues to carefully monitor Arthur's status. He conjures a damp towel and pats at his father's head, the futility of the action rendering it all the more important. Tom had sent him here to watch his father in pain, had even equipped him with the tools to watch Tom's battle from afar, but had not taught him how to help his father should it turn dire. Always mine, continues Arthur, staring unseeingly at the ceiling, his face twisted into a grimace. With a shout, he sits up in bed, Marley and Percy falling back, and points shakily at some unseen figure in front of him. You are nothing compared to me. You are mine and you will obey. What's happening, Percy? His mother asks nervously, righting herself and gingerly reaching out for Arthur again. He shakes her off and continues staring savagely at the battle unfolding before his eyes. Once again, Percy does not respond. His mind is with Tom, facing off against a sliver of his own soul. His father screams out brokenly, but it is a triumphant scream, and his lips are bared in a terrifying smile. Mine, he shouts, bellows, and then falls back into bed, whispering nonsense words to himself too quietly for Percy to make out thoroughly. And then, just like that, he sleeps. Percy checks the diagnostic charm again, but his father seems to be doing decently, if nothing better. Percy lets out a breath and feels all the stress in his body collapse into the room, hiding underneath the soft, worn rug and his father's robe, thrown over the armchair in the corner. "I think it is over," says Percy quietly, not meeting his mother's eyes. "You are not leaving this house without explaining to me what occurred here," says his mother calmly, as if she is not still clutching the cool hand of her husband after he'd clearly been possessed. Percy hesitates and then nods. He will have to say something, or he will have to obliviate his parents, and Percy does not want to obliviate his parents. He does not want to remove yet another memory from their shared lives, steal away yet another moment from his mother, who has so few. The Dark Lord has tied his life force, his magic, to the snake, he says quietly, searching for a way to explain without revealing any key truths. And I had reason to believe some of that. Force transferred to father when he was attacked by the snake. How did he do that? I do not know, Percy admits. Perhaps during the ritual when he forged himself a new body. The snake is his familiar. Perhaps he invoked some ancient magic. Molly nods, her face drawn and white, but nevertheless steady. And the snake is dead. I hope so. And since the snake is dead, your father will be free of this. Percy hesitates again, but he cannot lie, not when his mother is still holding his father's hand, both looking so incredibly tired. He cannot lie, not when he is not sure. I hope so, he repeats. His mother, being Molly Weasley, notices the evasion immediately, and his mother, being Molly Weasley, asks the correct question, the one that Percy wishes she had not asked. What can you do to be sure? Wait for me to die, maybe. Arthur breaks in, his voice rusty, but clearly awake and aware of his surroundings. For a while, there is no conversation, save Molly exclaiming over Arthur and Percy's insistence on doing a very thorough series of diagnostic charms to determine that his father seems tired and magically depleted, but otherwise alive and well. Then, with both of his parents looking at him expectantly, Percy finds that he actually wants to explain the problem to them. He has not thought of them as his parents in years, but they are approaching the age he remembers them as, and he's approaching the age he left his old timeline as, and perhaps selfishly, he wants his parents to help him with this problem. I need to continue doing what I am doing, Percy says evasively. Then he chokes, suddenly, his throat growing tighter. It is harder to stand in the burrow and justify his continued actions than it is to do so in the privacy of his own bed or in the ministry's office. Theodora's white, scared face screams at him, and he flinches under her accusing glare. But how can I? Arthur takes a fortifying sip of his tea and then meets Percy with a solid blue gaze. Is there no other way? Percy gives a shrug, some of his poise lapsing into the truculent child he'd once been many years ago. I do not think so, he says miserably. But I don't know if what I'm doing is helping or hurting. I don't. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. This last, his voice breaks, raising into a muted cry as tears threaten to swarm into his eyes. It's the sight of the blasted Weasley stockings hung over the fire, of the Christmas tree already glowing, of presents wrapped in green paper. His parents, participating in a mockery of their normal rituals, so aware of their own mortality and the mortality of their children. This is war, Percy, his mother says, and when he meets her gaze, it sears across him like a blast of dusty wind on a hot day. Dozens are dying every day. Your father nearly died just now, and I cannot imagine you are any safer. I'm helping with it all on the wrong side, Percy says harshly. I'm helping just in case I can take action when the time comes. But what if it doesn't come? What if I can't take action, and all I can say for my life is that I helped with it all? So don't help with it all, just what you need to, says Marley, and Percy's mouth snaps shut as he looks at her for the first time. Something in his mother's eyes flares, and he sees her as she perhaps once was, the young Prowett heir, courted by Lucius Malfoy himself, both brothers murdered for their defiance. The woman who wanted to go to France to duel, the woman who in another world murdered Bellatrix Lestrange without a backward glance. They are all raised on war, his siblings and his parents, and even their parents, and his mother looks at him like they are soldiers on the same battlefield. Perhaps it is not a look of warmth, or maternal love, or even affection, but in her gaze, Percy straightens and feels for the first time as if he can be equals with his mother, or this strange, fierce, brittle version of his mother that he never knew in his other life. I won't ask you what you've been doing, his mother continues, and I won't judge you for it, not now. There will be plenty of time for judgments at the end, but if you stop now, Percy, it will be for nothing. Severus would agree with you, Percy wants to say, but of course he has retained enough of his caution not to give away anything more. Perhaps his parents have guessed some of the dangerous double game he is playing every day, but he does not feel compelled to explain himself further, and they do not seem compelled to ask. Percy's eyes keep getting drawn to the stockings, and he keeps looking down the line for his. When he spots it, something in his chest seizes. Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, Ginny. They hang his stocking for him when he's inevitably died, or will they include it out of loyalty? His mum hung Fred's stocking for both the awful Christmases in Percy's past life, but she'd actually liked Fred, so he can't be sure whether he would merit the same treatment. Help where you must, and hurt where you can, Molly says, her voice flat. And do not lose sight of what you are doing. Perhaps some of them may be reasoned with, interjects his father, hopefully. Nobody can be reasoned with, father. Percy cannot help but cry, wrenching his eyes away from his mother only to look at his father, oddly childish, wrapped in the overlapping red and white squares of the quilt his mother made when Ginny turned 10. Nobody can be reasoned with. Not the Dementors, not the Death Eaters, not Harry, not anyone. I have to do this. I have to if we'll ever sleep at night. Otherwise, even if he is gone, we'll never really be sure. Then do it, says his mother harshly. Do it and stop dithering. Do it for me, Percy wants to say plaintively, but he stops himself. Help me stop dithering. Severus would tell him the same thing, and Tom besides. Tom with a start, Percy leaps to his feet. I need to go, he says, summoning his cloak wandlessly while he scrabbles for his shoes. Be safe, father. I'll me if anything changes. Actually, don't. I'll check on you quietly. At the door, he turns and babbles nonsensically. I started painting because of you, mother. And we would not be here if I hadn't. Percy, his mother calls out behind him, but he ignores her for the final time that day, flying out of the house and apparating as soon as he reaches the safe point outside the wards. He needs to see Tom now. Tom is waiting for him back in Percy's apartment. Tom is waiting for him on Percy's own couch, his long legs crossed, wearing what looks very much like a set of Percy's robes, the left side of his mouth pulled higher than the right in a smirk that seems perfectly inscribed on his pale, smooth face. His eyes are clear and bright, his dark hair is loosely tousled, and his skin shines with a faint sheen of sweat. In short, Tom looks very much alive, and more critically, very much not a portrait, though the frame still hangs empty above Tom's head. Percy stops in his tracks, his wand loosely held in his right hand, as he gapes at the very solid figure of Tom Riddle for the first time. He'd seen him in his memories, of course, but always insubstantial, his figure always slightly distorted. This was something else entirely, even more vivid than the Tom that had appeared to Percy in his own soul. Tom. Tom's smirk widens into a self-satisfied smile, the kind of smile that Percy is intimately familiar with after all this time. But seeing it cross Tom's face, his real face, makes Percy realize in an instant how much more alive Tom is now, as compared to any of the Toms that Percy has seen. The diary was a cool breeze wafting in from a door left open. This Tom, whatever he may be, exudes icy cold energy that blows past Percy's thick robes and spreads goosebumps over his skin. What so it worked? Percy manages, stepping inside his door and closing it securely behind him. Of course, the door will not keep Tom in, but perhaps it will keep any enemies out. Tom's grin widens even more, and he straightens on the couch, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I got the snake, he confirms with a slanted glance to the side, as if he does not care very much about what he is saying. This trick does not work on Percy. Percy is more intimately familiar with Tom's expressions than he is his own, given Percy's general disinclination for mirrors and photographs, and his unabiding obsession with various pieces of Tom's soul. I took its soul, my soul, back into my body. It worked perfectly, of course. Percy takes another few steps inside. He can't look away from Tom, from the living, breathing, solid body of Tom Riddle just a few meters away. Tom, that's amazing, he breathes, and his praise is completely genuine. To take Nagini's soul and absorb it into his own, Percy had seen him do it to mice. But for Tom to transform the same ritual for his own purposes, Tom truly is the greatest wizard of their time, particularly now that Dumbledore is dead. And your body. Nice, isn't it? Tom says, preening under Percy's appreciative gaze. Tom looks to be in his late 20s, or perhaps his early 30s, older than the 16-year-old boy that Percy is more familiar with, but younger than Percy's portrait made him seem. My little secret. How did you? Percy stops himself short. Perhaps he does not want to know. Tom chuckles amusedly. No, he says, as if in response to Percy's thoughts. Let's not delve too deeply into the shadows, shall we? Suffice to say, I obtained myself a body in full working order. And your father? Well, Percy says, still discomforted by the surreal experience of speaking to Tom Riddle as if he were a real-life man in front of him. Then he shakes his head and tries to bring himself firmly back to reality. If Tom is here, if Tom succeeded in removing the soul from the snake, then Tom has become infinitely more powerful, even as Percy's task has become easier. It is more vital now than ever that Tom trusts him. Thank you, Tom, he says with feeling, taking another step forward until the icy chill of Tom's magic is nearly overpowering. I will not forget what you have done for me. No, Tom agrees. He flicks his wrist and a thin black wand appears in his hand. I will need a new wand. I obtained this from Ollivander's old shop, though as we know, he took care to relieve Ollivander of his most valuable items. It will do for now, but it is hardly sufficient for what is to come. And what is to come? Percy dares ask. With one final step, he reaches the small interior of his living room and drops into the armchair opposite the couch, his shoes brushing the edge of the very same rug that has seen far too much. Tom looks up from handling the wand and quirks his lips at Percy. Well, as we know, Harry Potter is another Horcrux. The locket remains likely with Sirius Black, and he is still at large. And hopefully oblivious, Percy interjects. Tom smiles thinly and turns the wand gently over in his hands. I believe he is oblivious. He senses himself growing weaker, but he does not think to check on the Horcruxes. I think he is frightened that I may think to check up on them myself if he shows interest in them. He believes he is the only one that knows of the Horcruxes after the diary. Percy hadn't considered that. Of course, introducing Tom would trigger the Dark Lord to consider his other Horcruxes. But equally so, of course, the Dark Lord would not want to bring Tom's attention to them if he believes he is the only one to know their secrets. Percy tries to imagine not trusting a fragment of his own soul and concludes, not for the first time, that to be Tom Riddle must be incredibly lonely. What did you tell him about Nagini? Nothing, says Tom, in surprise. I left one of the Death Eaters there with a bloodied knife in his hands. I forget his name, the one with that horrid mustache and the ratty eyes. Avery, says Percy with apprehension. So you plan to make the Dark Lord think Avery killed the snake. Why would he do that? Because it will look like it killed his wife, of course, says Tom impatiently. I left both of their bodies there. Right, says Percy faintly. It should not shock him, of course, Tom's casual disregard for human life. But he knew Avery and his wife, with mousy brown hair and a quick, nervous demeanor. Avery had graduated just a few years before Percy. Then Percy shakes his head. One less Death Eater down, he tells himself firmly. Though it is no easier for Percy to stomach the death of a Death Eater that he knows than it is to contemplate the death of a Muggle-born classmate. Perhaps that is his true moral failing at the end of it all. Severus had told him to value all human life the same, and Percy, like a sheep, obeyed to the letter of the law. Tom continues with disgust. He is not in the country. I cannot understand why he is so obsessed with wands, as if sharing a core with the Potter boy means anything other than coincidence. But the Death Eaters are not growing weaker, even if the Dark Lord is, Percy points out, returning to Tom's earlier point. Day by day, the Dark Lord's hold on wizarding society seems to grow inexorably tighter. Percy hasn't heard of a mudblood capture in days. Most of them are languishing in Azkaban under Yaxley's lackadaisical watch, or dead, or long since fled. The Order presumably is continuing to stage some sort of resistance, but Severus informs him their efforts are largely confined to helping refugees flee the country. Tom shrugs one shoulder. On another, the gesture may seem lazy or unrefined. On Tom, he incorporates it into the sinuous movements of his body, so that the shrug seems both inevitable and novel. Percy cannot tear his eyes away. They will follow me, once they realize I am a better version of him. Percy, can you not see what is to come? If I can take the soul from the locket, from Potter, from him, I will be unmatched. course that will be Tom's goal. Percy feels incredibly stupid to have believed that Tom would be content only with the portion of the soul hidden inside Nagini. If Tom can absorb nearly half his soul back, he would truly be unmatched. Percy shudders to think of it. "What do you need from me?" "We need Harry Potter," says Tom instantly, as if he had been waiting for Percy to be brave enough to ask. "Get me Harry Potter. I will deal with him." "How?" "I have been thinking about the prophecy," Tom says. "I think if I absorb the Horcrux from Potter, perhaps the prophecy will apply to him, and Harry Potter, is not but a vessel." This is an interesting point. Percy had not considered that the prophecy may not apply to Harry, but rather to the Horcrux itself within Harry. Born as the seventh month dies, power the Dark Lord knows not. Perhaps that is a valid interpretation of events. But that means you may have to kill him and forsake the soul, Percy feels compelled to point out. "And you may be wrong. I would say that you should let one of them kill the other. I would let Harry kill him. His magic is tainted. We've both felt it. We do not know what his soul will do to you. Let Harry defeat him, and then take your soul back from Harry, and you will be free of him and the prophecy besides. Let Harry defeat him, and they have one less thing to worry about." Perhaps Percy can find a way to extract the soul from Harry before Tom comes after him, or perhaps Harry has to die, and that was always true, even in the other timeline. Perhaps Harry has to die so the rest of them can live. Harry, Percy thinks, would be reconciled to this if he felt there were no other option. If Percy can keep Tom occupied with the Dark Lord, and if Percy can find Harry and therefore the locket, perhaps Percy can remove all of the pieces from the chessboard except for Tom and the Dark Lord. One of them will die, presumably, and then Percy and Severus and the rest of the Order besides can figure out how to kill whoever survives, even if it's Tom. Tom nods thoughtfully. "Do you think the boy capable of defeating him?" "No," says Percy honestly. "But regardless of who wins the fight, you can easily defeat the victor." "Find him," orders Tom, as if the Dark Lord had not said the same. Part of Percy wants to go and find Harry today, to follow Ron or Harry's magic, or use the Dementor to pinpoint precisely where their errant chosen one may be hiding. But the other part of him is not confident that he can keep that a secret. Percy maintains his many secrets by merely keeping his head down. The Dark Lord rarely enters his head, and Percy is capable by now of going through the torture without concern for his secrets. Given the unbreakable vow he had taken with Severus, would kill him before he revealed key truths to the Dark Lord. But if Percy had been in close contact to Harry, would any of the other Horcruxes be able to sense it? Perhaps the Dark Lord already knows precisely how to retrieve Harry and wants to wait until he has a suitable wand before challenging him. If that was the case, Percy certainly does not want to openly approach the boy. "Yes," says Percy obediently. He thinks that very soon it will be worth taking the risk to find Harry, to destroy the diary and the Horcrux inside Harry if possible. The Dementor had said it not possible, but Percy is researching, and he is damned well determined to find a way out of the impossible. But having a plan, having resolve, soothes him, even as it scares him. He can handle Tom having a body. Tom has had a presence in his life long before he had a body. If Harry can kill the Dark Lord, Percy can finish Tom, or perhaps Severus can, or Andromeda, or McGonagall. Or perhaps Tom will not prove to be a threat to their way of living, and Percy will be able to persuade him to call off the Death Eaters and just live in peace. He looks at Tom contemplatively. Tom, he feels, would find it a waste to return to a body only to destroy it in war. "I just want to live," says Tom. "I am tired of death." Tom catches his gaze and raises an eyebrow. "What?" he says amusedly. "Do you believe this to be an illusion?" Caught, Percy flushes and then shakes his head. It is remarkable how much Tom has changed since Percy first knew him as a prickly 16-year-old and then a cold and calculating man. Even after Tom believed Percy to betray him, even after Severus forced him to swear a vow, Tom has mellowed. He did not have to return to Percy's apartment, once free to walk about in his own body. He did not have to update Percy on how he had destroyed the snake. He almost seems to enjoy Percy's company, or at least value it. Percy would not have believed it if he did not see the difference himself. "I just can't believe it," says Percy, some of the wild incredulity and stress that has simmered in his body all evening tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Tom, it's you." Tom uncrosses his long legs and leans forward, extending one slim hand. Percy's mouth goes dry. "Go on," says Tom lowly, and Percy swallows hard at the soft, almost dangerous challenge in Tom's voice. "I may offer this only once, Percy." "Or are you too scared?" Percy reaches out a trembling hand himself. His living room is small enough that Percy, leaning forward, can just reach Tom, and he flinches violently as their fingers brush, and a spark travels down Percy's hand and throbs softly in his mark, an echo of the heartbeat he'd heard earlier in his father. Tom feels real, his skin cool but very much flush with blood and magic and life. Percy cannot help himself. He reaches out again, and Tom watches him impassively as he traces the tip of his index finger across Tom's fingers, and then lower across Tom's palm. "You're here," Percy says, and it catches in his throat. To his surprise, he feels tears welling up in the corner of his eyes, and he blinks them angrily away, the flush in his cheeks burning more brightly. Tom will think him pathetic, weak, despicable, and he can't have that, not now. But Tom surprises him. He catches Percy's fingers with his own, and then slides his hand around Percy's until their palms are touching, Percy's rough fingers against Tom's silky smooth ones, the spark between them pulsing with Tom's heartbeat. "You know, I half expected you to see me here and try to kill me," Tom says, lightly tracing the tips of Percy's fingers with his. "But you wanted me to return." Percy freezes, and Tom scrapes his fingernail against the pads of Percy's fingers. "I have the diadem's power," he continues softly. "You always forget. I know you have thought about killing me, but you do not wish for me to die. You want me to live." Percy finds to his horror that the tears that had begun to gather in his eyes are swelling, stinging his eyes. If Tom is saying it, it must be true, for Tom can see Percy's soul, can't he? And yes, perhaps Percy does not want Tom to die, and perhaps while he distantly feels anxiety and fear over the idea that Tom has a body now, he also feels a sudden surge of relief that he is not alone. "You want me to live," Tom repeats to himself. "Good, as I have no intentions of dying ever again." He pulls his hand away, and Percy lets his own drop into his lap, his fingers suddenly bereft of Tom's light touch. As he'd said once to Myrtle, his feelings for Tom were complicated, but his feelings for the Dark Lord were very clear indeed. Kill him first, Percy tells himself later that night, after Tom has disappeared to wherever he chooses to disappear to, and Percy is once again alone in his bed. Kill him first, and the rest will follow. Percy should have expected that both he and Severus be invited to Tom's grand unveiling to Voldemort. Had Tom asked Percy, Percy would have politely requested that he be as far away as possible, preferably on another continent, with plenty of plausible deniability. But even if he could have said that to Tom, he would have known it was hopeless. If Percy knows one thing about Tom, it is that Tom enjoys an audience. But at first, Percy does not suspect that he is being summoned to see such a confrontation. When his mark burns the next day, late at night, he is already in bed, a steaming cup of tea by his side, an herbaceous blend of yerba made only 30 seconds from being fully brewed. He isn't sure he quite likes the taste of this new tea, but he enjoys how the smell fills his entire apartment. It makes him feel marginally less lonely. Percy's tea timer rings before his mark stops burning, and he defiantly grabs the mug of tea and takes a scalding sip. Just for once he'd like to have an evening to himself. Just for once he'd like the Dark Lord to bugger off and leave him alone. "Focus," says Tom from somewhere, perhaps sensing Percy's agitation, or perhaps Percy is just conjuring ghosts out of his own imagination again. Regardless, Percy heeds the warning. He takes another sip of his tea, still warm, but more bearable after a quick wandless cooling charm, and clears his head, taking a precious few minutes to complete a quick set of breathing exercises. Another minute to dress in his fine robes, and to note that he is nearly out of fine robes and needs to either employ a house elf or drop them off to be cleaned. And another to take him out of his flat, check on his wards, and then disappear to Malfoy Manor. At this hour, Malfoy Manor rises, ghost-like, directly from the grounds, emerging in a smoky blaze of white from the long, silver grass. The full moon drips its mist onto the spires of the manor, and the great white peacocks call their sorrows into the air. Percy shivers, pulls his robes tighter to him, and hurries up the walk to the front door. Severus is just inside. drying the dew off of his boots with an efficient spell. Nodding at Percy, he points his wand at Percy's dress shoes and does the same. Percy does not ask why they've been summoned here. The Dark Lord does not like his followers to delay, but the house elf leads them to a small parlor, not to the main ballroom. Percy notices with some discomfort that it is the room where he used to see Mr. Barrington. He recognizes the graceful chairs, the ones that are surprisingly comfortable despite their bony appearance, and the round velvet poufs which can balance a tray of tea or of paints. This is the room that Narcissa used specifically because Lucius rarely went in. Narcissa is not there, but Tom is, one long leg crossed over the other, sitting in a chair opposite to the Dark Lord. Percy nearly bumps into Severus, who stops short at the sight of Tom in the flesh. He does not do anything as stupid as speak to Percy, but he gives Percy a dark glance that promises retribution. And yes, Percy had not yet written to Severus that Tom had returned in corporal form, but it hasn't even been a full 24 hours. "Come in," says Voldemort, not taking his eyes off Tom. "I believe you two are already acquainted." Tom smiles and nods at Severus and Percy, who file in slowly. Tom looks perfectly comfortable in his surroundings, though Voldemort is clearly on edge, his nostril slits flaring and his forehead creased in anger. Severus takes the seat next to Voldemort, which leaves Percy sitting next to Tom. He gives Tom a weak smile and then bows his head to Voldemort, murmuring, "My lord." T. Ohm was just about to tell us all how he returned to a body, snaps Voldemort, his voice cutting. Tom smiles serenely, as if oblivious to the eddies of tension gathering at the banks of the room. "It's a fascinating story, really. I'm glad you both are here for it." Percy is torn between watching Tom and the Dark Lord as Tom tells his story in a bright, airy tone, as if he is recounting his latest Quidditch game or successful political maneuver at work. Percy has heard many men Tom's age tell stories like this in the pub after work, gesturing with their hands, their faces proud and animated. But it seems artificial on Tom's face, a thin veneer stretched over his stunningly vivid features. Tom does not chat. He does not brag, at least, not in the way that someone might brag about their latest promotion or their latest pretty conquest. Midway through the story, Tom had witnessed Avery kill the snake. He'd felt the magic filling the air. He acted to use it unconsciously. It occurs to Percy that Tom is doing this on purpose, exaggerating the incongruity of his demeanor with his person. Then Tom smiles at the Dark Lord, bright and sharp. "And so I thought we ought to work together for the interim." "Work together," says Voldemort flatly. Percy aches with embarrassment for both of them, and for he and Severus too. Why had they been invited to this? An insurance policy for both parties. Tom nods eagerly. "I will bring you Harry Potter," says Tom enticingly. "He does not know my face. He does not fear me." "My lord," Severus interjects, sending a ripple of shock through the room as both versions of the Dark Lord tear their attention away from each other. "Many of the Death Eaters who have been with you would recognize your younger face." Voldemort nods slowly, his attention returning to Tom, caught by the perplexing complexities of his younger face. Percy wonders what it would feel like to see his own face mirrored back at him, a face from another timeline, from another life. Not pleasant, he supposes. "And why?" Voldemort whispers softly. "Would you volunteer for this task?" "We are bound, you and I," Tom says, leaning forward. Percy is struck by the similarities in their profiles, even with Voldemort's strange, snake-like visage. He can tell instantly that they are shadows cast by the same figure, though shadows rendered at different times of the day. "We cannot harm each other, nor do we want to, not when we are more powerful together than we are apart." Percy very carefully does not allow himself to react to this outright lie. Severus' face is equally as impassive. "I have thought often of this," Tom continues softly. The Dark Lord nods as if hypnotized. "We must find a solution that allows us both to thrive. And the boy, why would you bring me him? He is our greatest threat," hisses Tom, and he and Voldemort make that familiar gesture of disgust, lips pursed, eyes away. "The prophecy is our greatest weakness. Let us dispose of him, and then we can decide what to do next." Voldemort laughs softly, the sound incredibly unsettling. He has, consciously or unconsciously, mimicked Tom's pose, his dark robes flowing over his seated form. "And how can I trust you? How can I trust you?" Tom counters, raising an ironic eyebrow. "We must trust each other. Who else can we trust? Would you betray yourself? Watching Voldemort's face carefully, Percy notes the smallest calculating smirk briefly cross the Dark Lord's face. Tom seems to be supremely unperturbed, as if unaware that his words have not been as convincing as he'd hoped. Indeed, Percy and Severus are bid to stay behind after Tom's audience with the Dark Lord has finished. Tom manages to excuse himself even after the clear dismissal from the Dark Lord, as if he were in control of the particulars of the meeting. Percy wants to groan in frustration, watching how Voldemort tracks Tom's departure with an irritated grimace. Voldemort motions for Severus to speak first, which Percy is not ashamed to admit is a great relief. Severus bows his head in acknowledgement of the honor and then says bluntly, "My lord, he is not to be trusted." "It has gone wrong," agrees Voldemort, his gaze swinging wildly around the room. Percy has the unsettling realization that perhaps the Dark Lord is frightened. The magic to create him, it was not meant to be used in this way. Percy moves to speak even before Severus can cue him to the same. "I apologize, my lord," he says bravely, inclining his head in shame. "I fear it was I who helped bring him to this form." Voldemort pins him under an intent glare. "And what did you do to bring him to a portrait?" "I painted the portrait and brewed the standard portraiture potion, my lord," says Percy, caught by surprise by the question. "The potion requires a representative sample of the person to be immortalized. I merely used the diary." At the last second, Percy is able to say diary instead of diadem without stuttering to fit with the story they had originally told the Dark Lord. "I supervised it myself, my lord," Severus says. "He made no modifications to the potion. I can procure you a recipe for it." "They are all at risk," Voldemort mutters, mostly to himself. "They can all betray me." What would it feel like, Percy wonders, not for the first time, to have your soul be willing to betray yourself, to not question the threat you pose to your own survival? Percy has made mistakes, a multitude of them, mistakes that felt to him like he was preventing his own success. He hates himself sometimes for those mistakes, for his arrogance, his ineptitude. But they are his mistakes. "My lord, I think it best to distract him," Severus says carefully. Percy nods supportively. "Set him on a course for the boy if you feel it safe. Keep him away from the other Death Eaters." "And you?" Voldemort asks abruptly, turning to Percy. "You have spoken to him often. What would you have me do?" The last thing they want is for Voldemort to feel compelled to collect the other Horcruxes and keep them close to him. Percy worries his lip and then says carefully, "My lord, I have surmised that there are others, like Tom, though less active. I would agree with Severus, my lord. If he were to find those and utilize them, it could be disastrous. I would imagine you do not want to destroy him, but there must be a way to contain him so that he may not find the others. I do not believe he knows their forms or their locations. To draw attention to them would be folly." "He has changed form twice," muses Voldemort, his gaze distant, tapping one finger against his lips in a familiar gesture of contemplation. "Perhaps he can change form thrice to something inert." "Is worth researching, my lord." Percy's mind feels tangled. Tom has stymied him with this latest development, which was perhaps Tom's intention all along. Percy does not know whether he wants Tom to be free, which is dangerous but also advantageous, to a point, or whether he ought to help Voldemort contain Tom or destroy him altogether. Sometimes, Percy feels like he is balancing precariously between these two, Harry dangling below, liable to be crushed if either side gains too much power. If Voldemort is too strong for them to defeat him, they will be unsuccessful, but the same could be said of Tom. Asterisk Severus. When they meet after the meeting by mutual agreement for a pint in a nearby Muggle town, the pub packed despite the late hour, looks equally conflicted. After a quick exchange with the bartender, Severus finds that there are rooms to let by the hour. Percy ignores the leer of the bartender as he follows Severus silently up the stairs. Percy waits silently in the hallway as Severus sets up the wards. At Severus' rough gesture, Percy steps inside the room. He feels the uncomfortable prickle of the wards as they snap through them. For one heart-stopping second, he is suspended in space, not yet fully materialized in the room, but not in his flat either, and the wards slick over his skin like oily water before they recede, and he is allowed final entry. Severus must feel relatively safe with the precautions he took because he does not bother with a glamour. As such, Percy can see in detail how his hair hangs, greasy and matted, down his back, how his teeth are stained yellow from tea, how the bags under his eyes look soft and puffy, as if even the slightest touch would pain. Percy looks considerably better, despite the shocks of the evening. He may be a double agent of sorts, contemplating how best to talk an old woman into suicide, but he is also the senior undersecretary to the minister, and damned if he isn't going to look the part. The low-level glamour he keeps up to hide the stress lines is second nature to him now, and he always strives to wear fresh, clean robes of respectable quality. "This war is going to kill me," Severus says, after he and Percy verify their identities, a ritual that Severus insists on despite them having traveled from the same place. He must be feeling particularly horrid. He asked Percy a nasty question on an obscure potions theory they had briefly looked into regarding the origins of the Draft of Despair, and when it had taken Percy a few seconds to recall the relevant text, he'd glowered over Percy with his wand drawn as if eager to apprehend a pretender. Percy had asked Severus for his mother's name. "Eileen, what's happened?" "Bloody sister tried to break into my office, again, I might add, to steal the sword of Gryffindor," Severus says, rolling his eyes. He holds up a hand to forestall Percy. "I sent her to detention with Hagrid. I didn't want you nosing about, so I elected to not tell you until now. I believe Potter is in contact with her, somehow, unless it was your instruction that led her to risk her life attempting to carry these through the castle." Severus withdraws a wrapped bundle from inside his robes. Percy opens it carefully, slicing through the wrappings with a neat little charm, and lets out a soft gasp when he sees the 4 small fangs nestled within. "I wonder how she got inside the chamber," Percy says uncomfortably. "I haven't contacted Ginny, but I wouldn't be surprised if Harry somehow was passing messages to her." He transfigures a bit of the wrapping into a small, straight stick and uses it to nudge the end of the fang. He looks at the stick again. The edge that had touched the fang is shriveled and black. Severus raises an eyebrow. The wrappings are covered in ice wasp wax. "Why, even ice wasp wax wouldn't prevent the basilisk venom from you used twice-rotten fairy plums. Evidently, and I would remind you your sister is perfectly familiar with the chamber," Severus says icily. Percy winces. "I see you're in a foul mood today." Percy hesitates. "Don't get mad." Severus exhales heavily through his nose. "What asinine plan do you have now?" "We need to break into Dumbledore's tomb," Percy says guiltily. He recoils at the look in Severus' eyes, rage, but resigned rage that is nevertheless quietly terrifying. "Planning to resurrect him as well, are we?" Severus inquires nastily. "I know where his father is buried. I suppose one of us shall play the part of his enemy, or will you be his loyal servant?" Percy ignores this. Severus is clearly spoiling for a fight, but Percy reminds himself with some effort Percy can remain on task. "It's the Elder Wand. You saw what I saw tonight. The Dark Lord is going to challenge Tom, perhaps consolidate his Horcruxes. He's going to need to intensify his power, and he is searching for wands often. It's a miracle he's not already approached the tomb." "And pray tell, what do you think will happen when he learns that someone, presumably a very powerful wizard, stole the Elder Wand from Albus Dumbledore's tomb? Will he not assume it to be the work of Albus, murderer? I'll be dead by the end of the week." Percy hesitates, and then says firmly, "I thought we would pin it on Lucius." Severus stares at him for a long second, and then pinches his nose with slender fingers. He avoids the bed that lays sagging in the middle of the room and takes a seat in the old, creaking chair besides. Percy eyes the bed dubiously and then gingerly perches on the edge, coughing as dust billows from below. Better dust, he figures, than some other noxious substance. At least its presence implies disuse, rather than the disgusting opposite. Percy thinks of the bartender's leer and shudders. When they are situated thus, Severus leans forward and says precisely, "I cannot allow Lucius to die." Whatever Percy had been expecting Severus to say, a defense of Lucius Malfoy had not been high on his list. He blinks, nonplussed, and rather weakly says, "Why not? I owe Lucius." Severus trails off, looking uncomfortable. He coughs, and pink gently tinges the edges of his cheeks. A debt. A debt. Percy cannot imagine the kind of debt that Severus would owe Lucius, particularly that would make Severus look so discomfited. What kind of debt? A life debt. "Lucius protected me," Severus says carefully. when I was young and in need of protection. I doubt he would have protected you and not asked for payment 5 times over, Percy objects. Then, struck by the thought, what do you mean he protected you? Like when you were in school? Had they even intersected in school? Percy frowns as he calculates the dates. Surely Lucius had not directly overlapped with Severus. Perhaps right at the end, Severus shakes his head. It is none of your concern. Come on, Percy urges, sensing a good story. You're the only person I talk to, aside from Tom. I hardly am going to tell anyone. All I've done in weeks is review reports of dead Muggleborns and asinine purebloods. Severus smirks at that, surprisingly. I did warn you that this job was not particularly pleasant, did I not? I thought you described it as simple and rewarding, actually, Percy quips, pleased to see some of the tension leaving Severus' body. What's the story? Please, Severus, I shan't judge you. It is sufficient to say that I was young, alone, and angry when I graduated from school, Severus says shortly, though not angrily as before. Lucius took me in as his ward. He allowed me to live with him, he purchased robes and books for me, and he schooled me in many things I had not yet experienced. Percy raises an eyebrow. Like dark magic. Among other things, yes, Severus says. Percy examines him closely and then stares. You're blushing, he accuses, delighted. You're blushing. Tell me, Severus, what else did he school you in? Before Percy can register that he just teased his ex-professor, Severus responds coolly. Things I imagine you have little experience in yourself. Suffice to say that without his instruction I would be dead by now. Percy contemplates the wisdom of another joke, but taking a look at Severus' face, wisely chooses not to respond. Privately in his mind, he marvels at the insinuation that Lucius cared for Severus, took him in, and was intimate with him. He cannot imagine Severus being intimate with anyone, though of course immediately as he thinks it he begins to wonder what precisely that would be like. And Severus with Lucius. Well, Percy says, instead of tormenting himself further, luckily for you, I had not envisioned we sacrifice Lucius. I rather thought we would make it look like Lucius realized that Draco could be the master of the Elder Wand, defeated him in combat, and then sought Dumbledore's wand for his own. Severus nods thoughtfully. And then, having secured the most powerful wand in the world for his own, he leaves his wife and child and flees the country. Well, not forever, Percy objects. And he wouldn't leave Narcissa and Draco. And Lucius is not stupid. He would not immediately challenge the Dark Lord. He would gather resources and power. It will occupy the Dark Lord to try and find Lucius, which may buy us time. Where will we hide him that would escape the Dark Lord's notice? I'm sure Lucius has a family home he could hide in. Severus shakes his head. The idea is not without merit, but Lucius is hardly going to flee the Dark Lord's side, so close to the end. Will he if Draco's life is threatened? Percy asks. I mean, we could point out that Draco could very well be the master of the wand, and the Dark Lord is looking as we speak for the Elder Wand. Draco could easily be dead within the month. Severus purses his lips as he considers it. Perhaps, he says slowly. But you forget that Potter must win the wand, so we must now arrange a confrontation in addition to an escape, all without the Dark Lord's knowledge. We are killing off pieces of his soul without his knowledge, Percy says dryly. I think we can perhaps manage this too. December 1997, Tom, for all he had told Voldemort he was tracking down Harry, spends the next few weeks experimenting with his magic. Percy watches him and is reminded of his own first few years in his new body, training his magical core to relearn the intricacies of magic. Tom does not have quite the same challenges, though Percy does notice that Tom is fatigued far more often by difficult spells than the Dark Lord presumably is. Tom's grasp of advanced magical theory is several years ahead of Percy. His skill with wandless and wordless magic is astounding, and his ability to force a stream of pure magic to his will without incantation or wand movement is unlike anything Percy has seen before. But he can tell that Tom is not satisfied, that his magic is not responding to him as fluidly as he remembered. Good, thinks Percy uncharitably, seeing how the edges of Tom's mouth twitch with irritation. Stay there for a while. Percy is so busy that he cannot even breathe. His efforts to divert information or funds toward the Order have slowed, of late, given that he has not been spending as much time at the Ministry as he'd like, and the types of secrets he does overhear. That Voldemort is afraid of his own Horcruxes and searching for the Elder Wand. are not the type he can pass lightly to Tonks. But the holiday season does bring a small respite. Even Death Eaters cannot be horrible 12 months of the year. Children return home after the Hogwarts term. Elderly parents must be duly visited. Gifts must be obtained for those fortunate enough to have a Yule log burning or Christmas tree openly glittering in their windows. Diagon Alley regains some of its former energy. The shopkeepers that survived the purge hesitantly putting out charmed signs to advertise their winter sales. The holiday season also brings the upsetting news that Harry, Ron, and Hermione have fled Grimmauld Place. Tonks catches Percy on his way into the office at 5:30 in the morning, dressed as Kathleen from accounting, and engages Percy in a bewildering discussion about expenses for the minister's upcoming trip to France. Bewildering largely in part because the minister is not going to France, and also because Tonks' understanding of bureaucratic accounting seems to have been pulled from a perplexing Muggle romance novel set in a corporate office, until they are alone in the minister's office. Hughes is still presumably asleep, not having been ordered to report to the office until 9, for which Percy envies him. "Just stop," Percy says loudly, over Tonks' exaggerated insistence that they must balance the credits and debits of the travel expenses before the end of the quarter. "Either you're being possessed, or you're not Kathleen." Tonks pouts at him and changes her eyes to blue, which is their usual signal that it is Tonks. "I thought I was doing decently there. Credits and debits." Percy repeats dubiously. "Honestly, Kathleen, I know 7th years at Hogwarts that understand the intricacies of the financial system more than you do. Why are you here?" Tonks deflates then and looks around her nervously, quirking Kathleen's eyebrows to ask Percy if he'd enacted the proper wards. He nods impatiently in response. "It's serious," Tonks says quietly. "He's dead." "What?" Tonks nods somberly. "No clue what happened, unfortunately. Mum felt. She felt the wards transfer ownership to her late last night. She went over this morning and the trio was gone." "Oh, bloody hell," Percy mutters, sinking into the minister's plushy leather chair. "So they're gone. They left some traces that they've been living there, rooms with mugs and plates, clothes in the dressers, things like that," Tonks confirms. Creature was too distraught to say anything of use. All he would do is mumble about Master Regulus and Master Sirius. "But I think something happened. Maybe a Death Eater made it through the wards. There's some signs of a struggle, curse marks and such." "Tom, was there a locket?" Percy asks urgently, pinning Tonks under an intense stare. "Did your mother say?" Tonks hesitates and then shakes her head. "I'm not sure. I need to go there now, Tonks." "But, now, Tonks." For a heartbeat, Tonks looks at him with puzzled confusion, maybe at the steel of command in his tone or at his sudden urgency. She seems to find something in his face that comforts her, for after that heartbeat she nods and then extends her hand. "Mum's still there. I can take you there now." Asterisk to be inside Grimmauld Place after all this time is eerie. As Tonks had said, there are clear signs that the trio had been living here full-time with Sirius for months. A book lying on the kitchen table, next to an abandoned cup of tea. A wonky, half-knit hat draped over the side of an armchair. A chess set on the table near the fire, in the middle of a game, where white was absolutely decimating black. Andromeda is in Regulus' room, where Sirius' body is lying in Regulus' bed, an expression of pained grief still marring his still face. Andromeda is half leaning over her cousin, her hand smoothing a curl of hair over his forehead, her fingers trembling. "Madam Tonks," Percy says quietly to announce his presence. Tonks hovers behind him, clearly uncomfortable at the sight. Andromeda flinches violently and turns, a curse spinning out of her wand. Percy had been expecting it and deflects it easily. "Percy," Andromeda sighs, turning back to Sirius, though her lips firm and her hand stills as she registers that she is no longer alone. "I thought you might come. The locket, is it here?" Andromeda bites her lip, an expression that seems out of place on her aged face, and nods slowly. She steps aside to reveal that Sirius, in his final moments, had been wearing the Horcrux, his hand clasped tightly around it. Percy reaches out a hesitant finger and touches the gold chain of the locket, lying against Sirius' cool skin. The second that he touches it, he gasps with pain, his knees buckling. Hogwarts on fire, the horrid flames of cursed fire flickering over the placid grounds, giants and werewolves and trolls wreaking destruction over their home, Percy's soul screaming, crying, tearing that inner steel of resolve. This cannot happen again. Tom, reaching out with one hand, the basilisk swaying, hypnotized under his grasp. A dirty muggle man screaming, Tom's cold, handsome face illuminated in sharp lines by the nearby street lamp, the magic gathering around Tom as he commanded it into the locket. Tom's screams, horrid and jagged. Little Dennis Bishop, his face white, choking on a mouthful of his own blood, a younger Tom stroking a small green grass snake, and watching in cold amusement as a second girl cut deliberately into Dennis' forearm, her eyes glazed over. Percy. Faintly, Percy becomes aware that he is on the ground, and the Tonks women are bending over him in concern. "I'm okay," Percy gasps out, coughing as he tries to force himself upright. "Just a shock. More than a shock, I'd say," Tonks says, having reverted back to her normal appearance in her worry. "Bloody hell, Percy. You were screaming up a storm." Percy waves away her concern, though he has to clutch tightly to her hand to help himself to his feet. It's definitely still active. "I touched it earlier, and it didn't do that," Andromeda says hesitantly, watching him carefully, as if he were liable to begin hissing at them in parcel tongue. Percy smiles weakly. He cannot even begin to explain why he might be more affected by the Horcruxes than she, and he does not have the strength to try. "It's the mark," he says instead, and both of their eyes snap involuntarily to his left arm, hidden as it always is by a thick pair of robes. "The locket shouldn't hurt either of you. How do we destroy it?" In the end, they bring the locket into the kitchen, where Creature hisses at the sight, flattening himself against the far wall. Ignoring the elf, Percy turns shakily to Andromeda, whose face is hard now that she has recovered from her shock. "Can you do it again?" But Andromeda's spell has no effect, though the spell sparks brilliantly through the kitchen, calling to mind a battalion of proud, brave soldiers charging over a hill. Tonks is looking at her mother with something like awe, but Percy has eyes only for the locket, stubbornly sitting on the kitchen table, unchanged. Then Creature peels himself from the wall and says, croakily, "It must be opened." "You have seen it before?" Andromeda asks sharply, at the same time that Percy says, "How?" They exchange glances laced with mutual irritation. "We can interrogate the elf later," Percy spits out. "I need to report that the trio has fled to the Dark Lord." "I should have already told him. We don't have time for this, Andromeda." Tonks watches silently as Andromeda's mouth spasms in disagreement before she nods unwillingly, allowing Percy to take charge. He's already moving, cornering the elf, pulling out his wand, trying to impress upon him how urgent it is that he cooperates. "How do we open the locket?" "With the hissings," cries Creature mournfully, pulling at one of his long, wrinkled ears. "The hissings, Dark Weasley child." The hissings from Master Harry. Parcel tongue. Percy runs his tongue along the ridge of his teeth. He no longer has the recordings with the parcel tongue commands on him, though he should have at least one of the orbs back at his flat. Maybe, or at Gringotts. He's not sure if the magic would still be active, so many years later. And how did Sirius die? Creature shudders and shakes his head, twisting his fingers in the corner of the white towel wrapped neatly around his thin frame. "I cannot," says Dark Weasley child. "You must ask Master Harry. There was a magic on the locket and Master Sirius helps to break it, but Creature does not know more than that." "Do you know where they went, Harry and the rest?" "They fled," Creature whispers. His large, bulbous eyes blink mournfully at Percy. "Creature did not protect them." Percy nods thoughtfully to himself, turning back to where Tonks and Andromeda are waiting silently. "We need to go," he says authoritatively. "I will leave the locket with you. If you can figure out how to open the locket, you might be able to use your spell, Madam Tonks. Do not wear the locket or interact with it unless you think you have a bit of parcel tongue to try. Is that understood? It killed Sirius, and it will kill you too. You will not be able to resist its magic, even if you think you can." He catches and holds their eyes, hoping to impress upon them the seriousness of what he is saying. "This locket has killed 2 blacks already. Do not let it kill a third." They nod soberly, dark eyes tracking Percy carefully. "I'll try to find a way to get the recording of parcel tongue," Percy continues. "Perhaps he can trick either Tom, or use his own memories. I am going to tell the Dark Lord that the trio fled, but that Sirius Black, to my knowledge, is still alive. Would Narcissa know otherwise? She might know that the ownership of the house passed to me as the next eldest black child, now that I am back on the tapestry, Andromeda says quietly. But as her status in the wards did not change, I am not sure whether she would have been notified. I had not known that Regulus died. Keep nothing sensitive here, in case Narcissa is able to break the wards on it herself. Percy rubs at his aching temples, trying to think if he's forgotten any other loose ends that will inevitably snap under him as he is relying on them to hold his weight. Be careful with the locket. Are you? Are you going to be okay? Tonks asks hesitantly. In her gesture lies all of the reasons that Percy may not be okay. The reaction he'd had to the locket, his obligation to inform the Dark Lord, his proximity to Harry. Percy shrugs. At this point, he does not have the mental energy to worry about his own well-being. Yes, the Dark Lord is, to Percy's surprise, pleased to hear that the trio has fled, and Tom later tells Percy that he's been ordered, repeats Tom with disgust, to find Harry but not apprehend him until the opportune moment. But the version of Tom most shocked by the events of the evening is the diary. Tom Percy is first aware of Tom's unease in his mind, creeping in like mist and lingering, curled around Percy's thoughts, in the back of his mind, as Percy continues on with his day. It sharpens into panic sometime after lunch, and Percy, finding himself too distracted with Tom's emotions to focus, excuses himself to lock himself in the minister's office and take out the stone that he carries with him at all times. Tom is pacing back and forth in front of Hogwarts, striding over the cobblestones of the courtyard in front of the great hall, the pendulum of the big clock tower behind him swaying in unison with his steps. When he sees Percy, the first thing he says is, "Finally," which Percy is a tad insulted by, though he lets it slide in favor of getting to the more important part of the conversation. Tom does not waste any time. "Harry Potter is a Horcrux," he says in a rush. "I can't possess him. Something is blocking me, and that something is me." "What?" Percy asks, genuinely shocked, though less by the revelation and more by Tom's knowledge of it. "How do you know?" "I felt it today," Tom says, coming as close to babbling as Percy has ever seen in his hurry to tell Percy the events of the day. "Potter must have been close to another Horcrux. I felt it near, and then Potter touched it, I think, and I felt it again, and I felt myself in Potter, and I knew." Had the Horcrux in Harry awoken at the touch? Had it killed Sirius? The clock tower begins chiming as Percy's panic builds. And then what? "I tried to possess Potter, but I was shoved out." Tom begins pacing more quickly so that the clock moves more rapidly and the chiming is more erratic and upsetting. "They've left the other wizard. They're in the woods somewhere. I got flashes from Potter's eyes. Trees, snow, it's bloody freezing, and they only have a tent." The great camping trip of the trio begins, 6 months later than it had originally. Percy's panic has begun to bloom softly into hope. It certainly will be easier to find Harry now that they are out in the open. In fact, can you sense where they are? This stops Tom in his tracks, and when he turns to face Percy, his face is calmer and more composed. "I think so," he says slowly and thoughtfully, his eyes turned inward as he focuses on something out of Percy's sight. "Are you going to come for me?" "What do you want me to do?" Percy counters. "If Harry's a Horcrux, what are you going to do about that?" "Well, I can't kill him," says Tom instantly. "I'm not stupid enough to do that. I suppose we'll have to protect the boy, perhaps make him immortal of his own, neutralize him, so he does not try to attack me any longer. He must know that if we are bound to each other, we cannot risk each other. So you will keep him alive and hope he does not betray you." "He'll be immortal too," Tom says, as if it should be obvious. "He shan't betray me then, otherwise he'd die." Percy reflects that this Tom, despite his proximity to Harry, understands him far less well than the other versions of the Dark Lord if he thinks that Harry would trade immortality for his moral duty. "But what about the prophecy?" "Blast the prophecy," laughs Tom scornfully. Percy wonders when Tom gained a fear of divination. Had he always been superstitious, or had he developed it later in life, after he'd begun to bargain often with the gods of old? "We just need to buy ourselves time. Perhaps we can extract the Horcrux from the boy later on. But if he kills Potter before we have a chance to try, we'll be killing ourselves." Percy says cautiously, "But you seem to be content with the idea that you may have to kill him." "He is diseased," Tom says, and behind him the pendulum ceases its swinging altogether. Tom looks utterly serious and far older than his 16 years. "He cannot be saved. His magic, it is sick, I can sense it, even from here." Can Tom, the other Tom, his other Tom, sense the same? Can the Dark Lord? I understand, Percy says, and he is half honest, half lying. So you wish for me to find you and Harry? Tom nods eagerly. Yes. An image strikes Percy with the force of a blow. Here are the crashing waves he had heard, the loud and turbulent sea. He feels almost like he recognizes these cliffs, as if he's claimed his due as a light wizard at their peaks more than once. The image is vivid, its clarity almost painful, married as it is with Percy's conception of his own soul. And then it ends, and Percy finds himself back in the office, sweating and grappling for the small black stone. He tries to contact Severus, but Severus is likely in class, or otherwise Percy believes he would have checked his linked notebook at the burn that Percy sends through it. He contemplates for a wild moment fetching Andromeda, Tonks, even Bill. But he cannot wait, cannot falter, in case Tom may do something reckless. So writing a quick note on the desk, Percy fixes the image of the sea in his mind and disappears. He arrives to silence. It is the sort of silence that is unnatural, oppressive. Percy is very attuned to the presence of wards after so many years of fine-tuning his, and he knows that this kind of ward is blocking out everything around Harry and his friends. So Percy is able to turn, listening carefully, until he can identify where the sounds seem to cease. The moonlight shimmers on a few silver blades of grass, and Percy sends his magic to scry for the corner of the enchantments. Powerful, his magic whispers to him. Very powerful. Harry, Percy speaks into the darkness, into that wild and wicked moonlight. I need to speak to you. Silence. It intensifies, as if Hermione layered on another spell, or as if the three teenagers are staying very still. I have information for your ears. It is about the prophecy and about your life. I need you to trust me. I promise I am acting in your best interest. It will all become clear. Still nothing. Percy does not want to risk tearing down Hermione's wards and harming them all in the process. He holds up his wand in his right hand, held to his palm by his thumb, and says, I need that diary, and we need to get to the locket. I know it is with Sirius in the house. What can Percy say to get Harry to trust him? I helped bring Sirius back, he tries. You may ask Andromeda Tonks. If Tom is listening, Percy cannot say anything too shocking. Go to her. Her house looks disused, but knock thrice at the side door. Ask her to corroborate my story. He licks his dry lips and says, We have very little time. The Dark Lord means to draw you out into confrontation very soon. I do not have to tell you what could be risked if we do not take care of the diary in your care and the other one. Andromeda has it now. She needs you, Harry. He hopes this last will induce them to reveal his presence. Oh, how can he know if they are even listening? Perhaps all he is speaking to are the rabbits slumbering underfoot, and the fish darting through the waters, and the great horned owls circling overhead. Go to Andromeda, Tonks. Trust her if you do not trust me. But quickly, Harry, quickly. Otherwise all our lives will be for naught. He turns to go, dispiritedly, after his magic confirms to him that he has no hope of ripping through their wards save force. He can only hope that Tom does not blame him for this failure. Asterisk Severus. I do not know if we can meet. Sirius is dead. Andromeda has the locket, but she needs Parseltongue to open it. Percy runs his tongue along the bottom of his teeth, noting with some disgust the furriness beget by a very long night without a tooth-cleaning charm, and then adds hesitantly, I have not been entirely honest with you. The reply, when it comes, is brief. What have you withheld from me? I have spoken more to Tom. The diary was not fully destroyed. Harry has it now. I can communicate with Tom in my head. I believe I spoke to Harry, but he did not emerge from his wards. The diary was destroyed. Percy exhales in frustration, blowing the air out roughly from between pursed lips. Severus, he begins, and then for several long seconds, his quill lingers in the air, droplets of ink falling onto the page and disappearing into their shared correspondence. I need you to trust me. Severus does not respond. Percy pushes his glasses up over his head and rubs at the bridge of his nose. His skin feels flaky and dry, as if all the time he has spent with Voldemort is rubbing off on him. He envisions himself with thin lips and two small slits in place of a nose, and feels a sudden urge to scream, or perhaps cry, or maybe just laugh. Then, from Severus, I do trust you. And Percy, despite himself, settles on a small, grim smile. December brings for Percy a new task, laid at his feet by the Dark Lord himself, inviolate and unrelenting. Percy had almost made it home after the meeting, slipping through the throngs of wizards adroitly, aiming for the apparition point outside Malfoy Manor. It had not been hard to make his way through the crowd. The mood after the meeting was quiet and unnerved. The Dark Lord had personally tortured and killed Merlinda Daggleworth, who had been recently discovered illegally creating international portkeys to aid the Order in ferrying refugees out of the country. And as always, when one of their own is killed, the other purebloods are eager to get home. Merlinda's impeccable bloodline and dark lineage was not enough to save her. Why would any of theirs? Even Yaxley, whose strut over the past few months has become almost unbearably cocky, is cowed. Damned shame, he mutters to Percy as they walk out together. She was the last Daggleworth, if I've got my family tree right. Bloody stupid of her to end her entire family line over some mudbloods. Percy hums in automatic agreement. His own stomach is feeling rather unsteady after watching Merlinda's blood splatter wetly around the room. Tom has not revealed to Percy what the Dark Lord did upon learning that Nagini was gone, but Percy has no doubt that her absence was partially responsible for the gruesome way in which Merlinda was torn apart, her skin ripped off her, as if a large invisible snake were tearing into her with its fangs. Come by tomorrow, Yaxley continues. I want to start interrogating some of the mudbloods we have. One of them might have seen Potter, and I don't know how much more of this I can take. Let's end it quickly. Percy would guess that Yaxley's sentiments were shared widely by the other Death Eaters, who seemed to be tiring of the constant blood and gore. They had been promised prominent positions in a new society, carte blanche to conduct themselves as they wished, and solutions to their most common grievances. Loose women, lavish parties, and rapid political ascension are more to many of these men's tastes than dismemberment and death. Perhaps if Bellatrix and more of the old guard had remained present, the tone of the Death Eaters would be different. But in their absence, some of the Dark Lord's unhinged laughter falls on increasingly deafened ears. Talking to Yaxley slows Percy, damn him, and so Percy is still 4 wizards away from his turn to leave when he hears the Dark Lord's voice in his mind, ordering him to return. Yaxley recognizes the look on Percy's face and the pained, cramped way that his hand clutches his mark, and claps him on the shoulder in sympathy, taking his place in line without so much as an apology. Percy steps out of the line dispiritedly and has to take several deep, calming breaths to clear his mind, wipe away his irritation, and return his frame of mind to eager, ambitious young pureblood. Then he turns and retraces his steps. By the time he returns to the ballroom, it is empty, save for the Dark Lord and the unbearable stench of Merlinda's blood seeping into the antique wood. Percy can picture Lucius' face and feels almost sorry for the man, ruining an ancient family house on the Dark Lord's whims. Concentrate, he tells himself, and sends that thought to linger out of reach with all of his other unsafe sentiments. When he drops to one knee in front of the Dark Lord, he forces himself to think, instead of admiration, of how the Dark Lord managed to mimic a snake attack with almost clinical precision, a feat of magic quite out of the reach of a normal wizard. These moments, right before the Dark Lord bids him to speak, are the most dangerous, as they tend to be when the Dark Lord dips inside his followers' heads. I will show you the spell, says the Dark Lord magnanimously, confirming that he had read the thought out of Percy's mind. You may be one of the few Death Eaters capable of it. I would be honored, my lord, whispers Percy, inclining his head, the small hairs on his head prickling with anxiety. Rise. The Dark Lord watches him closely as he obeys, forcing his aching body back to his feet. Your brewing has been gratifyingly capable, young Percival. Thank you, my lord, Percy says with genuine surprise. That is a high compliment. And I know you have spoken to your parents, as well as your eldest brother, the Dark Lord continues lightly. Without the snake by his feet, he has nothing to trail his fingers over, and instead Percy sees the other wizard flex his long, white fingers rhythmically. Have you found the order? Some of it, my lord, says Percy cautiously, not liking the reminder that the Dark Lord had been watching his movements. I found Andromeda Black. She is not in the order, precisely, but her fool of a daughter is. Andromeda Black never swore my oaths, comments the Dark Lord in surprise. Bella thought little of her. Percy flinches at the unexpected informality of Bella. My great-aunt Muriel, heir to the Prewett name, took me often to speak with Madame Black, to learn from her the history my parents forbade me to learn. She spoke often of her regrets to leave the Black Line. She considered it a waste, a dreadful cowardice to run away, but her pride prevented her from approaching Lady Malfoy and Lady Lestrange. The Dark Lord raises a thin, hairless eyebrow. Yet Madame Black married a mudblood. She told me that she regretted it when she had a child of her own, Percy says honestly, filling his mind with the memory of Andromeda Black's regret. She said she did not realize what blood and family meant truly until her original family had splintered and she had a child who would have otherwise inherited the Black lineage. She was very young when she broke away from her parents, my lord. She was acting out of childish spite. Regulus Black was very fond of his cousin, muses the Dark Lord. Percy freezes and hopes that his surprise does not show. Did the Dark Lord know already that Regulus had stolen his Horcrux? Perhaps not. She has told you something of the Order. Yes, my lord, Percy says. After Black fled from the rest, the original organization all but splintered. The werewolf, as you know, is fruitlessly trying to recruit some of the werewolves to his cause, but I have been monitoring his progress, and it is often proving more detrimental to his goals than otherwise for the clans to see such a pathetic excuse for a wizard, so I have allowed it to continue. Moody has disappeared. I suspect the evacuation efforts have much to do with him, but I have not been able to prove it. Severus interrogated McGonagall and found her loyalty remains to Hogwarts, not to Dumbledore. She cares little for politics, as long as she can teach her classes as she sees fit. My parents are old and feeble. He hesitates and then adds, I went to see them. My father is close to death. My mother is angry and bitter. They do not have any resistance left in them. I had heard you braved a visit to your little family hovel, says the Dark Lord, as if amused. Percy breathes an internal sigh of relief. He had thought perhaps he'd been seen, and so had thought preempting the rumor would be better. My brothers are not true followers of Dumbledore. They believe they are doing the right thing. They are not comfortable with bloodshed. But they are magically talented and would have no opposition to the type of meritocracy that you intend to establish, my lord. I believe it is worth noting that the Order only comprised pureblood wizards. They are far less concerned with mudbloods than one might believe. Typical Dumbledore, Voldemort hisses, his eyes flashing, to spurn the very rot that he preaches. Then the Dark Lord turns his attention on Percy, and Percy gags under the cold breeze that fills the room, setting his jaws and teeth hurting, and his ears to turn red with chill. I need the prophecy, young Percival. I need to know what it says. It has been destroyed, but I believe someone in the Order may know it. I do not know who, my lord, Percy gasps out around the magic tightening around his throat. Dumbledore did not trust anyone, even Severus. Voldemort curls his fingers around the latest wand in his collection, a long, gleaming length of wood engraved with delicate runes. He heard the prophecy from somebody. Presumably that person left a record for the Ministry to be able to copy. I need you to find it. There is only one answer to say. Yes, my lord. The Dark Lord closes his private audience with Percy with the obligatory threat. Otherwise, I may have to interrogate your family myself to see what they know. But Percy barely hears it. His mind is already spinning as he bows his way out of the room, calculating how they may use this request to his advantage. My objectives, Percy writes in careful lettering at the top of a fresh sheet of parchment. He is sitting in his mental library, and the books around him shift, sigh, and whisper to each other as Percy's anxiety manifests wind whistling through the cavernous room. 1. Harry needs to be killed by the Dark Lord. He pauses, the ink glimmering wetly on the parchment, and has to swallow against a fresh wave of revulsion. Severus has asked Dumbledore's portrait again, and again, and again, and all the blasted canvas of paint and magic replies, maddeningly serenely, is that the Dark Lord must kill the boy, and if possible, the boy ought to know he is walking to his death. Some type of sacrificial magic, Percy believes, but he hasn't been able to determine precisely what. The most powerful sacrificial magic demands the ultimate sacrifice, life, or a soul, or magic. If Dumbledore intends for Harry's death to power some sort of final ritual, it cannot be a trick. Harry cannot magically pop back to life minutes later. Percy swallows again and continues. 2. Once all of the Horcruxes are defeated, the Dark Lord is presumably mortal. Once the Dark Lord has killed Harry, he fulfills the prophecy and opens himself up to weakness. Someone needs to be positioned properly to kill the Dark Lord at this point. The most likely candidates in order are Severus, Percy, McGonagall, Andromeda, and Tom Portrait Tom. That is, Severus would be the most capable of killing the Dark Lord, who is a formidable wizard, even without the power of the Horcruxes. Percy is less capable, he will freely admit, but he and Severus both share the conviction that if they must give their lives away for the cause, they will. It would only take one killing curse, one spell, to end the Dark Lord's reign of terror. And Percy tells himself often, if Harry must walk to his death knowingly, Percy owes it to him to be equally as brave about the circumstances of his own demise. Tom could also be the one to kill the Dark Lord, but Percy is not yet sure whether that would cause them greater problems than it would solve. 3. The locket must be destroyed. 4. The diary must be destroyed. Percy's hand shakes as he continues to write, a barely imperceptible tremble that adds an extra small flourish to the upstrokes of his letters. 5. The diadem must be destroyed. Percy regards these last few lines. Something about their presence on the otherwise smooth, creamy parchment is discomforting, even though the parchment is not real, and Percy is merely sitting upright in bed, inhaling the scent of jasmine tea in an attempt to calm himself enough to manage a sustained foray into the privacy of his mind. It is easy to think of himself as destroying Tom, either Tom, but Percy is sickeningly self-aware to know that neither task will be easy. He pulls out a fresh sheet of parchment and starts anew. Tom's objectives: diadem. 1. Tom wants to see the Dark Lord defeated with minimal destruction of his own soul. 2. Tom wants to see the prophecy fulfilled, preferably without his interference. 3. Tom wants absolute power. All other Horcruxes neutralized. The diary's objectives are similar, though Percy does not think the diary knows about the prophecy, yet nor that absorbing 2 Horcruxes into one soul is possible. At least, Percy hopes the diary is blissfully ignorant, existing in the strange state of stasis that it had maintained for the last 50 years. So, how does Percy accomplish these 3 objectives together with a single faked prophecy? Tom and the Dark Lord must be convinced that Harry has to sacrifice himself. Percy thinks to himself, the flickering candles overhead dimming, to be replaced by large stone lanterns every few meters as the thought forms fully. Harry can be convinced to the same without a fake prophecy. Percy, unfortunately, knows it will be perfectly possible to convince Harry Potter to die for the good of wizard kind. Harry is too good, too brave, too kind-hearted. Percy wishes it were easier to hate Harry. It would certainly make the thought of orchestrating Harry's death more palatable. The diary has been outright destroyed. Percy scratches his quill savagely against the parchment he'd used to enumerate Tom's goals, wishing that he were a different man or a stronger wizard. Percy has had years to grow accustomed to the thought of Diary Tom's death, to the sorrow that such a powerful and promising wizard must be wiped cleanly from this world. He cannot be saved, Percy reminds himself. His mind produces a stack of Hogwarts periodicals, Tom sitting with his housemates at the long breakfast table, a small smirk on his face as they laugh ingratiatingly at his jokes. At the end of the photograph loop, Tom looks up and catches Percy's eyes, and the clarity of vision in his eyes is clear even from decades away. Tom knew precisely what he was doing, even at 16, Percy tells himself firmly. And the Horcrux is not truly Tom. It is a shade of Tom's soul, a sliver created with Myrtle's death. The Horcrux is not a whole soul. It is not redeemable, and Tom is not your friend. But Tom is something to him, and Percy is something to Tom. It would not be impossible to destroy the diary. Basilisk venom, fiendfire, and that glorious light spell that Andromeda had dredged up to destroy Hufflepuff's cup. Any of those would be sufficient to destroy the diary, once and for all. That the locket requires Parseltongue is definitely a hurdle, but not an insurmountable one. It is Slytherin's locket, after all, and Percy wouldn't have been surprised if Tom managed to invoke some extra protections on it as Slytherin's direct heir. Dumbledore had managed to destroy the ring, though Percy wasn't sure how he'd managed it. And Tom, Myrtle asks in Percy's mind. The bookshelves obligingly rearrange themselves, and the one in front of Percy displays the childish drawing that Percy had once made of Myrtle swooping through the open window of her bathroom. Diadem Tom is not Diary Tom. In many ways, Diadem Tom is far more alien to Percy than Diary Tom ever was. Except having Diadem Tom hanging on Percy's wall for such a prolonged period, having him as pews at Percy's place of work, having him in Arthur's mind, having him physically in front of Percy, his fingertips scraping over Percy's, perhaps because Percy is no longer 16 in either version of his life, perhaps because he is far closer to Tom's age. Perhaps because Percy understands Tom, understands that at some point, little wizards grow out of their childish dreams and ambitions and face the real world, with all of its complexities and challenges and stumbling blocks, and realize that compromise is necessary. Perhaps because Tom can be a little tired and a tad grumpy and even at times playful. Perhaps because Tom and Percy have seen each other with a clarity, seen their worst moments and harshest memories, that they've each sworn a vow to each other and are bound by their shared necessity. Destroying Tom will be hard, far harder than Percy can contemplate, and somewhere back in his body, Percy drops the mug of tea he'd been cradling, sending scalding fragrant water all over his bare legs and clean white sheets. We need to invent a new prophecy, Severus, one that will cause the collision we want. And how will we show it to the Dark Lord? I have some ideas. Tom and I explored much of the field of pensive magic together, back in the day. If we can pin it on a plausible seer, we could fake a memory and store it in a crystal ball. I have a seer we can use. For all that having a body seems to be a stabilizing influence on Tom, he looks healthier and stronger every time Percy sees him, which is both fascinating and unsettling. It seems to have the opposite effect on the Dark Lord. Percy does not know whether Voldemort is testing the limits of his power or merely enacting a dangerous show of strength for Tom. Perhaps his goal is to try out the variety of wands that he manages to procure on a weekly basis from sources unknown. Regardless of the reason, Percy watches with a growing horror in his stomach as Voldemort once again begins to lash out at the world around him. But even his earlier efforts had seemed tingled with rationality, even if Percy disagreed with them. Torturing muggles and mudbloods was, at least, on brand. Percy could predict those behaviors and attempt to circumvent them, even if he could not hope to stop the Dark Lord. But Percy sees the Dark Lord level an entire village with one sweeping, powerful storm of magical hail, boulder-sized stones, dropping from the sky and crushing dozens of innocent muggles fleeing for their lives, like ants scattering as a child stomps on their hill with dark glee. Percy is there when the Dark Lord thrusts with his palm toward the ground and splits the very earth open, a giant rift forming to pull his shrieking victims to their suffocating death. He hears stories of other such incidents, the Dark Lord calling upon the elements, manipulating the weather to raise lightning storms or burning sunlight, growing trees around those hopeful enough to run, trapping themselves inside a dark tangle of roots. You have to stop him, Percy says urgently to Tom, he of the limber-limbed body and sly, impenetrable smirk. And why is that? Tom is peeling an apple very precisely, practicing his wandless magic, tracing a finger over the ridge of an apple and watching in satisfaction as the peel falls away in one endless sliver. He's only attacking muggles. It's scaring people, says Percy insufficiently. Tom looks up and flashes a sharp grin, his finger continuing its slow revolution around the flushed red apple. Good. Percy takes an apple from the bowl as well, but he does not practice the same magic, merely feeling the waxy smooth skin under his fingertips as he copies Tom's actions unconsciously. Well, don't you want people not to fear him? Percy, says Tom, in that faintly pitying tone that he never used to use with Percy, back when he hung at Percy's mercy on his living room wall. As long as he does not grow more powerful than I am not concerned. Let people fear him. They will respect me all the more when I defeat him then. So you are planning to challenge him publicly. Tom smiles, setting down the apple onto Percy's kitchen table, the wet inner flesh of the apple resting against the wood without so much as a coaster or a protective charm. Percy eyes it displeased, but does not comment. Imagine this, Tom says lowly, almost a whisper, but one that builds in the back of his throat and emerges like dusty smoke from his mouth. The Dark Lord kills Harry Potter. The Dark Lord insists he is the most powerful wizard to ever exist. And then I step forward, and without so much as a wand, I call his soul to mine, like I did to the snake. He'll seem like he's dying in a blaze of pain, and his magic will transfer to mine. Percy licks suddenly dry lips, his hand tightening around the apple. I see. Tom smiles sanguinely and picks up the last of the apples that he'd ordered Percy to buy at the ministry cafeteria, despite the fact that Percy has still never seen him, or the Dark Lord, eat anything. He begins the charm again, focusing his magic more precisely, so that the slimmest sliver of peel curls to the floor at his touch. As long as he is out there, flinging boulders, he's forgetting that I exist, Tom says, clearly uninterested in the conversation further. And that suits my purposes perfectly. Percy is immersed in the middle of an extensive mental to-do matrix, mentally rearranging and creating tasks for the next week, though his face is impassive, interested, and alert, as finance and accounting presents the New Year's budget to him for approval, before bringing it to Pew's for a signature, when his pocket burns so hotly that he leaps to his feet, wand sliding instinctively into his hands. Kathleen Hopkins looks at him with muted surprise from her position at the front of the room, large, dark circles under eyes. He has no doubt that pulling together such figures was an exhausting task, but he cannot say he does not envy her for the mundanity of her work. Yes, Mr. Weasley. He flushes at the numerous curious looks and then scowls as blackly as he can. I have an emergency to attend to, he says cuttingly. This meeting has gone on long enough. Hopkins turns back to the figures she'd written on the board. To nobody's surprise, aside from the completely incompetent department heads that the Dark Lord had installed, the ministry is rapidly running out of money. Apparently lazy, wealthy purebloods are not the proper demographic to competently manage a budget, though Hopkins is doing her damned best to instill order into the chaos. Percy sometimes reflects absently that the ministry should hire all of the poor housewives of Wizarding England to set the budget to rights. Percy has seen his mother create astounding things out of a few old sickles and some household charms. Figure it out, he orders and strides from the room. It's the diary that he uses to communicate with Severus, of course. He flips it open and then sprints for the nearest apparition point, cursing Lucius' paranoia as he does so. He's 2 floors away from the closest one, and he's fully out of breath by the time he skids to a stop. Purpose for apparating? The guard asks, looking bored. Get out of my way, Percy snarls. He's gratified by the way the guard's eyes widen before he steps aside hurriedly. Serving the Dark Lord is not particularly pleasant, but it does have its advantages. He activates his mark, apparating to the border of Malfoy Manor, and impatiently submits to the ward check at the gate. He sprints past the house elf, who comes out nervously to greet him, and then doesn't stop running until he makes it to the drawing room, where he sees Severus, Lucius, and Narcissa sitting, having tea. For a second, he pauses in the doorway, breathing heavily, afraid that he's misjudged the situation. Then he looks more carefully and notices the way Severus is leaning forward intently, how Lucius is coiled in on himself, how Narcissa is watching them both with sharp eyes. Lord Malfoy, Lady Malfoy, pardon my intrusion, Percy says, controlling his breathing with some difficulty, though he is sure they are all aware of his anxiety. He gives a short bow and, clutching his wand, squeezes out a nonverbal cleaning spell to whisk away some of the sweat gathering on his brow and under his arms. Do come in, says Narcissa coolly. We've just made tea. Presumably, the manor is free of both the Dark Lord and Tom. Otherwise, he imagines there would be additional panic. Percy steps in cautiously and takes the seat that Narcissa indicates to him with a brief flutter of her hand. Harry Potter is in the basement, says Severus, not taking his eyes off Lucius. With the other 2. Snatchers picked them up an hour ago and brought them here. Percy flinches despite himself and follows Severus' gaze to Lucius. The other man's face is drawn, but otherwise inscrutable. I see, Percy says, when the silence grows to an unbearable pitch. And we are currently disagreeing on our next step. Severus smiles thinly. Why don't you inform Lucius what his son is carrying in his pocket? Percy glances around him nervously. Where is Draco, anyway? Watching the others. Percy imagines the chaos that Draco and Ron could cause, unsupervised and on other sides of a war, and nods hastily. Lord Malfoy, have you heard of the Elder Wand? The surprise of this question is enough to cause Lucius to break eye contact with Severus, albeit briefly. You come to me to speak of fairy tales, he asks derisively. Percy gives his best apologetic smile, a little hesitant, a little sheepish, but entirely earnest. I have been conducting my own research into it, and I agree the wand is but myth, he says, but he believes it is not. I cannot imagine that he would be fooled, Lucius scoffs, returning his attention intently to Severus. Severus raises an eyebrow. But the Dark Lord has certainly been going through several wands, hasn't he? He purrs, and despite all of his pureblood composure, Lucius flushes an angry red. None of them can prevent their eyes from dropping to Lucius Kane, elaborately decorated as ever, but lacking its true source of power. Lucius has been going through several wands himself, wands plucked from the bodies of dead wizards, and accompanied with a withering glare to forestall any comments from any Death Eaters who may question aloud why Lucius' wand has not yet been returned to him. Narcissa clears her throat and leans forward, looking at Percy. He believes Draco is the owner. He believes Dumbledore was the owner, Percy says carefully. Or if he has not yet come to that conclusion, he will. Dumbledore found it. Advantageous, let us say, to have his enemies believe he had the wand. But Severus killed Dumbledore, protests Narcissa, flicking a glance to where her husband and Severus sit, locked in a silent battle. But Draco disarmed him first, says Percy gently, out of some kind of mercy. He stares at Narcissa soberly. I don't think he has put it together yet, otherwise Draco would not be alive. But the Dark Lord will think of it soon. Does he need to be killed to transfer ownership of the wand? Lucius asks. Severus smiles at Lucius, honeysweet, and Percy half expects to see blood gathering at the creases between his pale lips. Planning a murder, are we? Lucius gives Severus a look of such derision that Percy feels abruptly certain that the thought had, however briefly, crossed the other man's mind. Percy hurries to elaborate. If the wand is real, which I doubt, I believe defeat is sufficient to transfer ownership. Defeat in a duel. Draco took Dumbledore by surprise. It is possible his actions qualified as defeat. And yet you insist the wand is not real, says Lucius, letting his fingers cross over the snake head on his elaborately carved cane. Seems rather convenient for you, Severus. We need to run, Narcissa says sharply, breaking through the undercurrents of tension swimming like lazy sharks around them. Now. But we have Harry Potter, Lucius breathes meaningfully, and the wand remains unsaid. And once he's killed Potter, he'll kill Draco, Narcissa snaps before Percy can say anything. He'll kill all of us, just in case any of us have ownership. We must leave. And Potter, Lucius insists. Narcissa, this is our chance to reap the type of reward we deserve. Narcissa laughs, and the sound is cruel, like a tiny dagger slicing abruptly through the air. If you still believe that a reward from the Dark Lord would be merciful, you are a bigger fool than I thought, she says cuttingly. We will let him go, and nobody will ever know. She looks at Severus, and then Percy, as if to assess their compliance in this lie. His life for my sons. Severus looks at her just long enough to give a short nod. Lucius takes the opportunity to leap to his feet, his wand, or a replacement, at the very least, falling into his hand instantly. I will not hear this treachery in my own home, he says, pointing the wand firmly at Severus. Percy shivers. Some of Lucius' old majesty has reappeared in his tone, and the effect is startling. You have no option, Severus thunders, and to all of their surprise he steps forward until he is gripping Lucius' forearms in his hands. Lucius flinches but does not move to extricate himself. Lucius, listen to me. Despite the clear tone of command in his voice, Severus sounds almost pleading. I have lost too many in this war, and for naught. Do not throw away your life on foolishness. You taught me first to be subtle, and I beg you now to recall those lessons. Something passes in the gaze between Lucius and Severus. Percy can't help but glance at Narcissa, but she looks only determined. Whatever history her husband may share with Severus is inconsequential compared to their present realities. Percy does note that despite Severus' rare display of affection, he does not reveal that Percy and Severus are planning to break into Dumbledore's tomb and pin it on Lucius. Fleeing his service is enough of a death sentence, but to flee with Dumbledore's wand would be a clear threat. You must hide, Percy says with that in mind. Not merely flee. You must hide so well that even if he were to go looking for you, he would not find even a whisper. Narcissa nods shortly but does not elaborate. She merely turns, snaps a finger, and summons a house elf into being. Bring our things, she commands. I'll check on Potter, Percy says. But downstairs, when he goes past the creaking steps and through the small puddle of light cast by a hanging lamp, as if Lucius were a jailer out of a book, when he cautiously pushes open the barred door, he sees only the dead body of Peter Pettigrew and an empty cell. All three of them and Draco, and whatever other poor souls were imprisoned there, are gone. Narcissa absolutely refuses to leave without Draco. They must have kidnapped him, she hisses out viciously, staring at the empty cell. Killed Pettigrew and ran. Severus kneels next to Pettigrew. Percy can see that something very odd happened here. Pettigrew's silver hand has strangled him, its grip so tight not even death released it. A gully of magic ebbs and flows slowly over the tarnished silver, and when Percy hesitantly touches the silver knuckles with one finger, he finds the metal is still warm. I do not think that is what happened here, Severus says slowly. He gives Percy a meaningful look. There are traces of old magic here, beyond any of their reaches. And no sign of a struggle, Percy points out reluctantly. It is possible the trio managed to subdue Draco, wrestle the wand away from him, and then all disappear, but it is exceedingly unlikely. Bloody teenagers. Lucius hisses, just once, a sign of how shaken the other man is by the revelations of the last hour. To learn his son may have the fabled elder wand, to learn his friend and wife are not as loyal as once assumed, to learn his son may have willingly aided Harry Potter to escape the Dark Lord. Percy doesn't blame him for lapsing. But in the next moment, when Percy looks over, Lucius has pulled himself together and looks only furious. Traitor, he spits out angrily, flicking his gaze around the room. Or a weakling. Neither is welcome in my house. Narcissa pulls herself together too, but where Lucius is full of anger, she has only resolve. We must leave, she says, catching her husband's eye. Either Draco ran or was taken. She does not need to say the obvious. Either way, they will be punished severely. She turns to Severus. He cocks an eyebrow at her. Another Narcissa, he inquires silkily. She merely shakes back the sleeve of her voluminous robes and offers her forearm. Before Percy can put together what she means, Severus is motioning impatiently for him to serve as their bonder. Severus, then Percy, swear to Narcissa that they will not reveal the circumstances of what happened here today, nor the Malfoys' intention to flee, nor insinuate knowledge thereof to anyone, until the war is over and the Dark Lord either victorious or defeated. I will not bind myself to this treachery, Lucius spits out when Narcissa vows in turn to not reveal of Severus or Percy's complicity in the matter. Lucius, do not be a fool, Severus says lowly, watching the golden strands fade around his forearm. Without pausing, without looking at Percy, without any indication that his next words will be treacherous in their own way, he takes a half step forward and says very quietly, His days are numbered, Lucius. I know this as fact. Percy tenses, his gaze flitting to Narcissa, who does not outwardly react. You could not know that, Lucius scoffs. Even if you plan to end him yourself, you will be wrong. He rose from the dead, Severus. In this last, Percy hears a strange note of fear or maybe horror. It is interesting. It has been many years since Percy first learned the Dark Lord resurrected himself from the dead. He had been 18 at the time, and the thought had filled him with an intense, childish disgust. In this timeline, he'd had years to grapple with it, not to mention an increasingly thorough understanding of how Tom accomplished the impossible. He hadn't stopped to think about what others had thought of the news, how it must have affected his old followers, whether they would have been excited or horrified by the news. Magic does many things: animate, destroy, heal. But it does not resurrect. Death is death. It is inviolate, the one thing all types of wizards, squibs, and muggles can agree on. It would have shocked the pureblood, particularly the dark community, more, maybe, than the other sections of society, to learn that the Dark Lord had managed the impossible. Lucius Malfoy is a wizard comfortable with death, with torture, with destruction. Percy has personally witnessed him kill both wizard and muggle in manners more cruel than he would have thought possible. Even the books he'd given Percy, doubtlessly more tame than others in his library, were darker than nearly anything Percy had read in either lifetime. And yet, Percy had no doubt that Lucius would hesitate before trying the Horcrux ritual. If Percy had to put down money, he'd bet that despite Lucius' magical ability and skill, he wouldn't actually go through with the ritual even if there was a sacrificial victim in front of him, ready to go. It would be as repellent as the idea of eating another person's flesh with his bare hands. So in retrospect, Percy can understand why even powerful men like Lucius bowed to the Dark Lord. Dumbledore set into motion several events before his death, Severus continues, his lips barely moving. I cannot speak of them, but I have been watching, and I believe they will be successful. He is one of Dumbledore's spies, Lucius asks sharply, cutting his eyes toward Percy, who stiffens. Severus shakes his head, a small smile playing on his thin lips. Merely an opportunist like I once was, he says, and Percy watches in fascination as Lucius' face softens. And he came to me for aid like I once came to you. Trust me, Lucius. You're best to flee while you still can. I will watch for Draco. We have ties on both sides. If I hear anything about him, I swear to you I will do my best to keep him unharmed. Asterisk, we can't be sure Lucius will go quietly, Severus says quietly to Percy as they stand to the side, while Narcissa inspects her luggage and Lucius begins the arduous process of bringing up the defense wards at Malfoy Manor. He swore the vow, Percy says, equally softly. Severus chuckles soundlessly, his throat moving gently. Lucius can cause trouble locked in an empty room. So what are you proposing? Percy grips his wand tighter. He does not think he is ready to kill Lucius Malfoy, let alone Narcissa, but he will take action if Severus deems it necessary. Severus flicks him a dry look. Merely that we must be watchful. But Lucius leaves without a word, without a hint on his aristocratic face to suggest whether he would or would not cause trouble. Narcissa leaves too, but the look she leaves Percy, desperate, is not likely to leave him for many days. He swallows suddenly and hopes that Draco decided to go with the trio of his own accord. The Parkinsons, perhaps feeling the pressure of the Malfoys' absence, or more likely, trying opportunistically to fill the large social vacuum created as a result, throw a large, extravagant Christmas party, which is why Percy spends the last few days of 1997 with a group of increasingly intoxicated purebloods. He has to admit that rich purebloods do throw a good party. The spectacle distracts him from wondering what his family may be doing, or which of his peers may still be alive, or whether Tom, mysteriously absent for the holiday season, is plotting to kill him behind his back. The Parkinsons convert the entire left wing of their manor into a series of celebratory spaces. A small dance floor with a live band, house elves though, not humans, a balcony with ever-falling snow and glittering glacial lights, a large banquet hall with perpetually refilling platters of hearty fare. They even drag in a Yule log and set it aflame, sending a peppery fragrance wafting through the air. The party begins on Christmas Eve and does not technically end until the new year. Percy spends most of the 24th at the party, eating his way steadily through the banquet, and then most of the 25th at home, throwing it all up in his bathroom under the disapproving gaze of his mirror. But on the 26th, despite himself, he returns. Something about the way his flat is exactly the same, day after day, is harder to bear at the end of the year. And at least at the party, he does not have to think very much. And he, in theory, has the opportunity to eavesdrop on the various goings-on of the British wizarding elite. The party is not exclusively for Death Eaters, though likely Voldemort intends it to be a recruiting event of sorts. Percy believes that Voldemort believes his work is nearly complete. Harry Potter remains the only real thorn in the Dark Lord's side. Now that the Ministry is firmly in his grasp, most of the mudbloods are dead or fled. Dumbledore has been vanquished, and Hogwarts is in Snape's oily clutches. The Dark Lord, maddeningly, does not seem to say very much at all as to what his plans are for after Harry has been killed. But Percy has a suspicion that the Dark Lord himself will continue to spend most of his time traveling, looking into various magics, while the purebloods at home jostle for position at the top of the new hierarchy. After all, the Dark Lord does not seem to particularly like these purebloods. Certainly, he does not attend any of the party events, which must be a real blow for Cypress Parkinson, who clearly spent a pretty penny to impress his unwanted houseguest. Percy privately thinks this whole war is less about the Dark Lord accomplishing specific goals and more about the Dark Lord having carte blanche to murder his enemies at will. Dance, Weasley. Yaxley, his face flushed from the copious amounts of elf wine provided. Bulstrode had informed Percy in an undertone that the wine was of rather good quality, but not the best quality, appears in front of Percy and eyes the plate of cured meats that Percy is assiduously working his way through with a dubious glance. You look like you'd rather be slitting your throat than enjoying Cyprus hospitality. Not quite slitting my throat, Percy responds dryly, but I'm contemplating the wisdom of the draft of living dead. Yaxley guffaws, reaching forward to pick a slice of thinly sliced ham off of Percy's plate. Don't be like that, Weasley. You know the ministry would go to shit if you went and offed yourself. Surely that comforts you. On the contrary, it makes death look rather more preferable. Weasley, what is the point of supporting a Dark Lord? Here, Yaxley lowers his voice and glances around him with exaggerated caution, as if half the attendees' dark marks aren't fully out for display. If you don't reap the benefits, it isn't as if he pays us a salary to do his dirty work in the ministry. Dance. There are some pretty witches here who wouldn't mind that you're a Weasley. Lead with the Prowett name, and you'll have them in bed in no time. When was the last time you got laid? I know Muggle women aren't to your taste, since I never see you at any of the revels. Not to say I blame you, I've no stomach for blood myself. Percy shudders delicately. Please, it would be like laying with an animal. Yaxley laughs again loudly, as if Percy is the funniest wizard he's ever encountered. Between you and me, I completely agree, he says, stealing another slice of ham. Gives me a bit of a headache between my temples to think about bedding them. I'd rather stay away from Muggles entirely, in fact. But these witches tonight, Merlin, Weasley, you would be a fool not to take what they are offering freely. Are they offering it freely? Percy snaps, a bit disgruntled that Yaxley has come over to his quiet corner and interrupted his solitude. I thank you not to judge me, as if your soul isn't as black as the rest of ours, says Yaxley, lips tugging into a conspiratorial smile. They'd sleep with anyone who may merit them an introduction to the Dark Lord, and you, Weasley, are just behind me in line to the minister. Percy thinks he is rather in front of Yaxley, at least when it comes to proximity to the minister, but he does not protest. In fact, he does not protest at all when Yaxley banishes his plate to the opposite corner, and he does not protest when he finds himself dancing with a very pretty young witch that reminds him a little bit of Penelope, at least in the way she flicks her brown hair over her shoulder impatiently when it falls too closely to her eyes. He does not protest when she kisses him, or even when she suggests beneath lowered lashes that he apparate her home. He does not protest to any of it, not to the way she gives a little gasp at the sight of his dark mark, not to the way she artfully inquires after his ties to the Death Eaters, not to the way she pushes him onto the bed and crawls up to his chest. The Dark Lord does not allow very many women at all into the ranks, and some of these women know what kind of men Death Eaters are, and some of them have begun to think about how to secure their place in a new order that is as misogynistic and crude as it is wealthy and traditional. He does not protest to any of it because he does not have anything to say, not when it is the day after Christmas, and he did not receive a Weasley sweater, not when Potterwatch will report somberly tomorrow morning the destruction of one of the Order safe houses with 13 individuals inside, presumed dead, not when his dark mark burns at the moment he first enters the witch and feels like he's going to explode into 10,000 tiny slivers of a man. All the portions of his soul shredded into pieces and sent into the wind, never to be collected, only to be hunted by all the people who believe the worst of him and destroyed by all the people that know precisely how black his soul truly is.